Well, colleagues, all welcome to this afternoon session. We have a wonderful series this afternoon, both classic and Middle English, later continental, and of course contemporary as well. And our first speaker this afternoon is a dear friend and somebody known to us all, Gerry Doyle. We all know Gerry very much indeed as a former retired IT manager for 40 years. He was in the world of IT, president for 14 years, I know, of the Huntington's Society of Queensland, and we know your leadership and service in that role. Gerry was so very important to so many families in Queensland. Gerry's been collecting since childhood. He's been a member of our society, the ANS, since 1983, and he's the immediate past president of the Queensland branch of the Australian Numismatic Society. We all know Gerry as the authority on Farthings, and this afternoon it's a special delight, Gerry, to introduce you, present to us the Farthings of Ireland.
Thank you. Just get the technical computer difficulties sorted.
No. Get started on this then. So we might try and kill that light.
Yeah.
I'll do it in a minute.
Yeah.
It's true.
I don't know which of these places.
Wow, that fast. That fast. Oh, you were using a mouse.
Well, I'll start by looking on the lights. There we go. That's fine.
Yeah, that's better.
First of all, welcome all, and it's great to be back after 3 years, seeing you all getting a bit older like me, but survived the COVID shutdowns and spent a lot of time searching on the internet and elsewhere for Farthings. Being a farthing tragic as I am, my paper is going to illustrate the history and troubled times of Ireland over the centuries. And the time starts with John in 1177 and ends with the last farthings issued by the Irish Free State in 1966. Next slide. Farthings from Ireland are varied. They consist of regal issues, some silver, bronze, copper, tokens issued by the Crown by patent, token issues, which I'm not going to cover here, or cut issues, cut pennies, siege farthings, and of course those in recent times issued by the Republic of Ireland and any other farthings I can get hold of. Start. Next slide, please. I'm going to start with John. I've started with John because initially there were 3 issues under the reign of John. First as Lord of Ireland, or Prince John as he was then. The second issue, which was actually done by John de Courcy, the Lord of Ulster, I think he was. And then of course regal issues, the third issues from John. Now the first issue are known as the Laskell farthings. They were issued by Prince John. He visited Ireland in 1169, and of course he was accompanied by one hell of a lot of soldiers from his father. They're small. I don't have any in my collection, but they're 10 to 14 millimetres, and the money's name is on each of the cross, on the 4 sides of the cross. And the money were for Dublin, Nico, Norm, Toma, Turg, And for Limerick, Siwa, and for Waterford, Jeff, Mark and Walt. Now, of course, I believe that top one, which I don't have unfortunately, is from Norm. That's I sit on the couch and look at that as Norm. Probably Norm. The second issue is referred to as the St Patrick coinage, and it's most likely issued by John de Courcy, some doubt on that. But they were minted at Downpatrick and Carrickfergus. What I'd like to spend a bit more time on is the bottom one, because I do have a copy of that. That's actually from my collection. This is from King John. It consists of, at the head of the portrait you can see in the triangle, and a world sun on the reverse. The weight is between 0.32 and 0.39 grams. It has a diameter of 10 to 11 millimetres. You want to have a good look at it? I've got a magnifying glass beside it because you probably need it. I was fortunate to pick this up not so long ago, this King John one. They are scarce, and I paid a little bit more than face value for it. It has the money's name, and this one I believe is from Robert, who's from Dublin, who also was William and in Limerick Wace. Next slide please. Yeah, I want to go on and spend a bit more time on the Edward I, because these are much more common. I have 3 examples in my display. There's 2 mints used for these coins, Dublin and Waterford. The one on the right is Waterford. You can just see there, VA, WAT. Around here you've got Dublin. Once again, they're small, 10 to 11 millimetres diameter, and about 0.36 of a gram. Now I want to explain, these are small silver farthings, not popular, because as you can imagine, having those in your pocket, you're going to lose them pretty quick. But they were not used for common financial transactions that we use money to go and buy things. Instead, they were used by the Irish people who would exchange their goods for currency, for Irish silver coins, to pay taxes to the English. So, as an example, to explain that, in Dublin, in this time, John, if you went and sold a bushel of wheat, whatever money you got for it, a couple of shillings of that, you actually had to pay a tax to the government. And that tax for a bushel of wheat was a farthing. Of course, the only way you could pay, you can't write a cheque for a farthing, so you had to have coinage. So the English created these silver coins and made money out of producing the coins by them. You know, put half a farthing's worth of silver in, charge it for a farthing. But then they got the coins back. That's taxation.
GST.
Robbery is probably a better word. So the story of these, they were not used for common financial transactions like you would a penny or the coins. So hopefully that clarifies what they were actually used for. Because imagine walking around with a little bag of silver farthings. I wouldn't have minded having them now, but okay, now I'll just mention there is an interesting silver farthing attributed to Edward III, who reigned from 1327 to 1377. There's only one of them. No. So I don't want to go talk. I don't have it and don't want to talk about it. It's summed down, you know, as anything that's single piece. Anyway, next slide. Edward IV. Here's an interesting one. The farthings made, there was a lot of coinage of Edward IV. But the farthings were quite interesting in that they were made of billion, which I'm not sure whether it's silver heavily debased by copper or copper debased by silver. But anyway, there are several issues of these. The issue of 1462, which is known as the heavier farthings, is the top one. There's a large crown, suns and roses in place of the legend, and with the reverse across in the centre with the mint name. It's hard to read, but that's... And in one of the later issues, known as the, which is once again when Edward IV debased his coin several times, and this is known as this is issued in 1463 to 65. It's a much lighter coin, and it's known as the Patrick farthing. And you can see in the obverse the mitred saint's head facing the sun and rose, and the reverse Salvator cross with rose and sun in alternate angles. There's further issues there, but during this reign, half farthings were also issued. The next slide, thanks. Under Charles I, there were what's referred to as the royal farthings, which were tokens, which I refer to as tokens, but they were farthings made under patent by Lord Harrington, Maltravers, and also the rose farthings. I'm not covering them in this paper, as they're used in both England and Ireland. But there were, during this reign, farthings issued by the Confederate Catholics. And these are known as the Kilkenny issues of 1642 to 43. If you want to buy these coins, dig deep. To let you know, the Bandon Bridge one there, which you can see, you can just see. I took this out of a catalogue, 2015 catalogue, and it sold for £1,400. So we're talking very rare, very expensive coins. These were issued as Bandon Bridge, Youghal, which is one this end with the ship, and the T, and Cork. There was also one for Kinsale, which I don't have a copy of. Next slide, thanks. Well, we'll go to Charles II. This is the sort of thing that was happening a lot. In 1660, Charles II granted a patent to Sir Thomas Armstrong for a term of 21 years for coining farthings and other coppers. And at the same time, he prohibited the use of all other tokens. The first of these farthings was issued in 1660 to 61. The obverse is a crown with two sceptres, and the reverse a crowned harp. The mint mark is plumes, and it has no date. The second issue, one below it, is the St. Patrick's farthing, with the verse with King David playing harp with the crown above, Gloria Rex. And the reverse has St. Patrick with the patriarchal cross, driving away snakes and reptiles. So he was not a world fighter for you at all. He didn't like snakes. I'll go on to the next one, and this coin's over here. I also have the Limerick siege halfpenny. During the second siege of Limerick, the halfpence and farthings were struck over large and small gun money shillings. The obverse has a portrait of James II with the legend, Iocus, blah blah blah. And it's interesting that some in Ireland refers to this as James the Beeshitten for abandoning his Irish supporters. Those that have read about the siege of Limerick, it ended with the defeat of the Jacobites. They surrendered at Limerick. Prior to that surrender, the French mercenaries had closed the gates had locked the gates of Limerick, and I think 600 Irish soldiers or mercenaries or whatever you like to call them at that stage were found in the Shannon. So James, of course, as we know, fled to France. That's why he was not a popular person. The reverse has Hibernia seated, you can just see her there. Quite often these you'll see the under the strike remnants of the shilling. That's the small shilling, and the halfpenny was done on the larger shilling, gun ones. It's interesting to know that when the Jacobite army was allowed to withdraw to France, it still numbered 10,000 soldiers plus their dependents. That's the journey that became known as the Flight of the Wild Geese. Now to the next one, once again another interesting piece. This is George, once again another patent, 1722, patent for copper coins for Ireland was granted to William Wood, and he had these coins struck at his Bristol foundry. The coins were lighter than the contemporary English coppers, and in general they were boycotted by the traders in Dublin because they were lighter. And there was a large movement, and the boycott of these coins was urged by Dean Swift in his Draper's letters, which declared Wood was trying to defraud the public. In 1724, these coins were recalled from Ireland and all shipped to America. I'm not sure where the piece that I have over here is, whether it's come from America or from Ireland, because I bought it in Australia. There were two types, one issued in 1722 and the second issued in 1723. Quite a nice example. You can see there, 1723. But once again, very unpopular decision by the local populace. We now go to George II. Unfortunately, I've got examples of the three dates. They're not as good as those ones. Once again, it was due to a shortage in small change being available in Ireland that these coins were issued by the London Mint. They were issued in 1737 and 38, and again in 1744, and the next issue, the old head issue, which quite clearly seen, issued in 1760. I should point out that all during this time, 1700s and 1800s, a lot of the merchants in Ireland were using copper tokens. They're quite nice coins. They're reasonably, they're not too hard to find. Pretty hard to find in that condition. The next one is George III. And this is the only coin issued, or only farthing issued by George III in Ireland. It's dated in 1806. It's the only year that that was issued. It's quite a nice example. I've got an example in my display. In 1826, Irish coinage was formally withdrawn and regal coinage from England was used for the next century. I do not have the 1822 proof farthing of George IV, which is the only one here. That was issued in 1822. This coin, 1806, is quite readily available. I might go to the last bit now, or probably a bit quick today. In 1926, the Irish Free State decided to issue its own coinage. I'm sure many of you know about these coins. Percy, Metcalfe designed the coins in what we know the Barnyard series. And these included half crowns, florins, shillings, sixpence, threepence, penny, halfpenny and farthings. I'm pleased to get farthings. These were struck at the Royal Mint in London starting 1928, with bronze coins made of an alloy 0.955 copper, 0.03 tin and 0.015 of zinc. The farthing was first issued in 1928. You can see there the obverse, the woodcock, flying woodcock and the harp. In 1939 the obverse was changed, the coin on the right with the words air, and the date in a different place on the harp, but the rest of it remained the same. So that brings, in 1966 was the last year of farthings. In fact, Ireland had issued the last farthings of the world. So they're the first to begin in the reign of King John and the last to finish in 1966. That's no hard questions.
Thank you so much, Gerry, for that really encyclopedic overview, and we're delighted in the way you bracketed it at the end. Open for comments and questions.
Okay. I just wondered, did you ever bother collecting the cut farthings?
I do have cut farthings, but no, I didn't bring them on.
Oh, I see. Good. Well, they're quite interesting themselves.
Maybe another paper quality.
There's got a penny a cut at 4
Well, it's funny. The cut farthings were mainly probably Henry II, Henry III, and a few others. Much more very common in Scotland. And the practice was outlawed by Edward I. And he, I hope there's not too many Jewish people here, but he chopped their heads off of those caught cutting coins. I should point out too that you could see that those small farthings, most of them have been clipped. As most silver hammered coins, they were clipped, take a bit of silver off, and so you get that. But yeah, certainly cut farthings. I did mention them. I do have a couple of Irish cut farthings, which are pennies. I think generally pennies come to 4.
Gerry, there wouldn't be much left of those very tiny silver farthings if they were clipped.
Well, can I go back to the first one? You can see the first.
First one?
Yeah, that way. Yeah, you can see how that's been clipped across there.
Just taking a tiny sliver off. I guess.
Yeah. That's very cool. That's why it's very hard. That's why I've got in my display. I've got some books there because first of all, it's very hard to get a full legend. So identifying these coins is difficult, and especially ornaments and how people would do it. Because I believe that to be norm, but it's off centre. And once again, this is clipped, and most of them are. And so it's very difficult to read the legends, and it's almost. If someone says I've got an uncirculated, hammered farthing I probably won't believe them, so it's probably made in China.
Thank you.
When they say that they're clipped, why would they clip them?
To get the silver.
To get the silver, but what, to keep a little piece of silver?
Yeah, put it all together.
You get enough clippings and you got a whole penny's worth.
That's what they did.
They do that with banknotes, don't they? Take little bits of the banknote off
Oh,
and stick it all
really?
together.
It's,
But I tell you, it wasn't, the clipping isn't sort of a routine thing that a bank would do.
oh no,
It's just...
no, these probably never went near a bank.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing about why these story about the taxation is difficult to explain. But you've got to realise Henry II, I think it was, yeah, because he did all had his wars with France and ran out of money, and he wanted to introduce all this taxation to build his coffers up. And you know, when you think of it, in those days, there was no bank to do the transaction. You couldn't write a cheque. So you know, either you want a bushel of wheat, you might give me a pig for it, or maybe you give me some money. And so, but then Henry came in and said, well, I want taxation. I want to tax the Irish population. Which
Early
he did.
goods and services tax. Maybe.
So-
Yeah, that's well, I call it more.
What
It's
would it be? Would it be
more
sort of,
robbery.
would it be something that the person who had the farthing was saying,
Oh, I'd be the money is
I've got to give this to the government, so I'm going to pinch a bit of it off.
Yeah, could be,
Yeah,
but that,
I don't, you know, I
but it was
give him-
very common practice to
and give him
clip
part
coins.
of the farthing. Yeah.
It was very common to clip.
Thank you.
And
If you'd like to ask.
Yes, I noticed in all of the modern Irish coins, the harp, I saw 1660 was the first time your coin had a harp. Is it are there any earlier than that, the harp in Irish coins?
There's Henry VIII.
I don't think so. Most of them had a very 16. That was the Charles. Yeah, the Charles. That was the Armstrong
That's the
one.
first one.
Generally, the reverse was similar to the English reverse, with the cross and the three pellets and in the legend the city that minted them.
Perhaps we could ask John, when was the origin of the harp as a symbol of Ireland?
The earliest coins, they're not farthings, I'm pretty sure, but the earliest ones are Henry VIII. Henry VIII has
Much
harp
later.
coins.
earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you.
George.
In the Limerick siege pieces, you say that the large gun money shillings was either struck to make a half.
Yep.
And the small shillings were overstruck to make a farthing.
Yep.
I think if you was to keep your eye on them, you'd find there'd be sixpences in there. Gun money sixpences.
There were gun money sixpences, but
Yes, there
my
was. There was gun
my
money
understanding
sixpences.
the farthings were only struck. Well, that's
But
my
I'm sure
research.
you'd find there'd be siege farthings on sixpences.
That's the halfpenny. That's the farthing.
Yeah, thank you.
Just to
Stephen, you had a question?
Just pointing out on the concept of clipping. I might have a coin and I'll clip a little bit off and I'll spend it, and the person I gave it to, they'll clip a little bit off. And eventually it'll get so small that the person receiving it says, no, I can't take that, it's too small. Or I'll only give you a half penny for a penny, sort of thing. So when you see a clipped coin, it wasn't necessarily one person going clip, 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 clip all the way around. It was, might have been a dozen people all taken off a little tiny slice.
They probably were training the Chinese to do it.
John?
In fact, some of the English hammered coins and some of the Irish hammered too. It's so badly clipped that the centre part of the portrait's all that's left. There's
Yeah.
nothing about the legend.
Yeah, that's why that's very difficult, because they destroy the legend. And as you know, I'm sure you see plenty of hammered coins that's very difficult to identify because you need the legend.
Thank you. John?
Sorry, could I ask, when did they first bring in farthings in Ireland for commerce, as distinct from paying your tax obligations?
don't really have an answer for that. I doubt whether it's the silver farthings.
You think it might be one day,
I would,
17th century or something?
well, it is. Yeah, see, from the silver farthings, then there was Edward IV. I would say Charles I, when they, with the royal tokens, they were very common. You know, the Harrington, the Maltravers, the Rose. See, the Rose farthing's got that. When we talk about clipping and counterfeiting, if you have a look at that series, those, I might have to. No, I don't want to do paper on that. That's too complex. But the Rose farthings had that copper insert. You know, that was to stop counterfeiting, because probably, especially the Maltravers, about 20-30% are contemporary counterfeits. They're catalogued in Everson. If you have Everson's book,
So
he
that-
goes through and you've got to work out. Once again, you need the legends, both obverse and reverse, to work out with their forgeries.
Well, it's a great privilege, Gerry, to have you speaking about a subject which is so encyclopedic. We're just watching the time and we'll have to stop there. It's a pleasure, as you know, for the conference to present each of the speakers with the conference medal, designed and coordinated wonderfully by Ron. So on everybody's behalf, it's a delight to present this medal to Gerry. Could I just mention before I do that, Gerry, that there'll be the quiz tomorrow. There is a design mistake in the rigging of the bark, of the Endeavour, on this, and that'll be a question in the quiz tomorrow. So this medal will become very, very precious in the future because of that. So Gerry, on behalf of us all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure now to introduce our president, John Veltmeyer. John, as we know, has been a member of our society for the last 3 decades or more. John is a retired electronics engineer based in Sydney, and it's on his quiet and reliable shoulders that so much has depended in recent conferences here, particularly with the IT stuff, John, for which we're all very, very grateful. In his retirement, John has established a private coin dealership firm, and we wish you all the very best in that, John, and we know that we'll all wish to support you in that commercial enterprise, in a domain and in a hobby which we all love so much. Thank you. So John, having said all that, of course, apart from tinnies, one of the most important aspects in outreach in all of numismatics are souvenir tokens. And this afternoon, John Veltmeyer is going to tell us about souvenir tokens.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I picked on souvenir tokens as a topic because I also plan on manufacturing souvenir tokens. And one of the things that I've always sort of found with all the other manufacturers that have been making the souvenir tokens lately, they used to always call them souvenir coins. Now, I really don't understand why they call them coins, and so I thought I'd start off by just explaining to you exactly what a token is, as opposed to a coin. As it says there, the key point between a token and a coin is that the latter is issued by a government authority and is freely exchangeable for goods. So, why people call the little souvenir tokens that you collect at various souvenir shops, why they call them coins is beyond me. As I'm ramping up my manufacturing on souvenirs, I'm going to be calling them tokens, simply because I don't believe they're coins. So, in numismatics, tokens are trade tokens, a coin-like object. Of course they are, they're round. And you've got a round object, and people naturally think that they're coins. I did have a chat to one of the other manufacturers on the souvenir side, and he said, I do that because the tourists don't understand tokens. They understand coins. So that's why they put souvenir coins on the thing. Whether it's right or wrong, he didn't care, he just wanted to sell them. And so that's why he went down that track. But I think to myself, I'll do it right. You know, if they don't want to buy them, well, bad luck. They'll miss out, won't they? So yeah, so that's what the field of tokens are part of Exonuma. You know, so it's a sort of a bit of a spin-off area from our numismatic titles. So you know, and I'm sure that everybody has collected some sort of Exonuma in the past. You know, be it a share script or you know, whatever, you know, all sorts of something related to numismatics. They tend to throw it into that category. Tokens are always made, you know, well, they're always made of cheaper products because you don't want to go making souvenirs too expensive or still want to buy them. So you generally make them out of it's not so much copper and pewter, or it's mainly just basically steel. A lot of the tokens that I have from various different categories, they are just steel. And easy enough, you can find that out by whether or not a magnet sticks to it. So a lot of the stuff that I'm making is basically on copper. You know, as you know, I do elongated coins as well with a couple of my machines. I use 1 and 2 cent coins because it's cheaper to buy a 1 cent coin for 1 cent than it is to buy a sheet of copper and make little circles and use the blanks. So, so copper is probably one of the main ones, and I do use brass on the big machine as well. So that would be the two areas that I'd probably stick with the souvenir tokens that I'm making. It's copper and brass. Bakelite, well, I don't think anyone uses bakelite anymore because if you put enough pressure on that stuff, it'll break. And leather and porcelain, so that's why. But so tokens typically has a much or limited use and is often issued by private companies, group associations or individuals. Government departments generally don't go near tokens because they make more money out of coins. So I've got a small example of the the tokens that I've collected over the years. Just over here is my display, and these are a few of them. Yeah, it's interesting to sort of when you go to different places, they'll have a little coin, be it a car wash token or whether they have a gaming token or whatever. You generally find them everywhere, and I generally just pick them up and just put them in my collection. So we've got those gaming tokens. This particular one has a little panther on it. Well, that came from the Panthers or Penrith Leagues Club down in Sydney. The other ones are the tokens of different from different places. More gaming tokens, but a lot of these tokens, and again, you've got to remember that these sort of tokens are generally issued for amusement houses. You go to pinball parlours and stuff like that. If they need a token, like a circular token to go through the mechanism to start the game, they will generally use one of these.
Tasmania's missing on the left one.
Yeah. Sorry?
Tasmania's missing on the left one.
On the left one?
Left one.
That's because it's not used in Tasmania.
You're very nice people there.
That particular one, where's that one from?
You're just not squinting, Barry. If you squint, you can see Tasmania just fine.
We're very well behaved in Tasmania because if we don't, if Victoria cuts off the submarine cable, we drift down to the Antarctic.
Probably Tasmanian token.
Actually, there it is there, Barry.
Oh, they're going to squint.
It is.
Very small.
Yeah, it is actually on the coin.
Oh,
Sorry,
good. Thank you.
on the token. It's actually on the token, so have a look at it. It's on the bottom drawer down here. But you'll have a look at it, you'll see that Tasmania is...
It's its size of importance.
Well, I suppose the old fruit machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nowadays they use all sorts of other things to activate the mechanism. So, okay, we have Superstars of League. Now this is something that the newspapers generally try to sort of sell newspapers with. They sort of issue these things to sort of say, well, every time you buy a newspaper you get the next one. And these are generally made out of steel. They're probably the cheapest metal that they can use to make these sort of tokens. But there's a whole series of those, but that's just a small example of the Superstars of League. Okay, Sunday Telegraphs did a thing on Sir Donald Bradman. They issued those ones, and the other ones on the right hand side there are the ones from the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. They had a whole series. They had 3 years to go, 1 year to go, and then they started producing the tokens for the Olympics. Again, I think that those ones were sort of like a brass rather than steel. For the children, they used they also made these ones, and typically you could see the size of these tokens. They're predominantly all pretty much the same. Like they could be around about 27 to 32 millimeters. So it's probably the ease of manufacturing if you had the same size, just change the picture. But again, there was a whole series of little tokens that they put out for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And like if you go through scratch boxes, you generally find those things all the time. Came across this one. This is quite interesting. This is like a McDonald's token. Now, you don't generally see this thing, but it's sort of a bit confusing, and I'm still trying to find out exactly what it's all about, because this is the obverse and reverse of the actual token. But it's got a big 50 there, and you would naturally assume that what they're talking about on that McDonald's token is that it's been 50 years since they started, and 50 years of the Big Mac. But if you have a closer look at it, you'll find that they've got the date all wrong. But it looks like they've only been going for 40 years. So maybe that's why I sort of bought this thing, because it was an error token, and they didn't really issue them. I never saw them. I've never seen them issue them in any McDonald's stores. I bought that from somebody over in Hong Kong. So, and it's around the edge of it. It's got all different country writing and everything else, but it's just an interesting little piece. Again, one of the things that I generally do when I pick up tokens is I look at the design of the token, because with my tokens I try to make the token in such a way that it's try and create a 3D effect. And if you look at that one, you can see that the Big Mac is sort of standing out a little bit. The number 50 is standing out a little bit. A lot of the tokens that you see these days, they look like just a simple line drawing, and it doesn't inspire me much at all with that thing. So I try and create a better design, make it more three-dimensional. So that's that one. If anyone knows anything about that 50th anniversary, please let me know. Right, this is the Souvenir tokens. Now this is quite a big range of tokens. You generally pick them up quite readily. The ones at the top, they're from Questacon in Canberra. Then we go to the Australian War Memorial. They have a series of tokens as well. And then coming down the coast, we have, there's a couple there from the little country out to the east called New Zealand. And then these ones here, then we've got Tasmania ones there that they have on the ship going overseas, Tasmania. So again, I think there's one of them, and I'm just not too sure on which one it is, but most of them do actually say souvenir coin. But as I said, they've been manufactured by somebody else, and whereas there is one there that has got token written on it, and that's what I'm planning on doing. So that's a whole series of different ones, and finally there's a couple more. And what I've done over the years, the ones up the top, I can't really see it here, but this particular one is from the big merino up here. Now, I generally visit the big merino at Goulburn every time I go to Canberra, because it's a 2-hour drive, and you stop at Goulburn just for a bit of a break, and naturally you've got to go to the big merino. So, and what I've been doing, like every year, I would purposely buy the coin, because the manufacturer of those ones, he would always put the date on it. 2010, 2011, 2012. So every year I would try and buy at least 2 of those coins. Sorry, 2 of those tokens. But just in the past year, he stopped putting the date on it. So obviously he's been sort of thinking, well, what happens is that when he produces all these tokens, when the end of the year comes along, the souvenir shop sends them all back, because they're out of date now, and then the new sets come to. And I think he's probably ended up with quite a few returns, so therefore he's decided not to put the date on them anymore. So it sort of means that I don't need to buy them every year anymore. But there's a bit of a variety there. It's all there, and you can have a look at in depth if you wish. But that's basically the tokens that we are sort of working on at the moment. Okay. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Questions, comments and discussion? Perhaps I could ask, John, I don't give away anything commercially in confidence, but what would be the minimum run that you could do as a business commercially? Could you, if I came along and said to you, I want 100 tokens, is that a goer or not?
Yes.
It's possible for you to do that and still make a...
The paperwork that I have from the previous people that were making the tokens, I will add that I have a 200-ton press stationed in one of my factories, and the people that I bought the machine from, they would do runs of 500, right, and then they would sell them to the various souvenir shops. And that's what I'm saying. When the previous person had the dates on them, when they sold 500, they would say, "Send me more," and he'd send another 500. But then he would end up getting 250 or 300 back, because the date was out of date then. And that's why he's taking the date off. But it's all about the cost of the die. With souvenir shops, you generally don't change much on it except for the date. Right? The style that you put on it, or the picture you put on it, is generally relevant to the customer. Questacon, for instance, will always have a big Q on it, because that's what they are. So that's one of the things that you don't need to change. So then the reverse is something that you will change. So you put the date, change the date.
The reason I ask about 100, I know that it's popular for there to be family meetings, family groups come together and they bring 100 to 500 relatives together once in a lifetime. And I do know that once or twice there's been tokens struck to give every attendant of those. And they're greatly treasured. They pass down the generations in a family potentially. And that's another great sort of potential commercial.
Yeah, it just depends on on how many you want to make, but you've got to remember that if you want to make one-sided, you make one die. If you want two-sided, well then you've got to have 2 dies. Now you can have one die having the family name or the family crest, which is going to stay the same for all the for all the other tokens. So you just simply have to basically change one die. And like in my system, there's always a common reverse on those ones, and it's generally a map of Australia with a kangaroo on it. Now I've changed that a little bit, made the kangaroo stand out more, and sort of had it, you know, more like a medallion type thing. So that's going to stay the same. So whenever I need to make something different, you know, for the souvenir shop, I have to do one die. So I'll have a common reverse.
When you're designing a token, do you use a graphic artist, or what?
Yes.
What do you say? You
I
have the concept of,
I give the concept.
and go to a graphic artist. He or she then designs it, comes back to you, and then you, using that, create the die,
Yeah.
and away you go.
Well, generally, like what George was saying about the holy dollar that we designed, you know, you probably agonised over how to fit it all onto the metal. You know, there are certain things, like if I go to a new customer and I say to them, well, I can put your design, or, you know, your logo or whatever you want on it. Like if you go to an animal park, for instance, you put an animal on it. If you go to Western you put some sort of space item on it. Or if you go to a historical area, you put a historical building on it. So yeah, you just get a picture of it, send it off to the graphic designer, and then prepare it in the right format so that the engraver or the die sinker they call it, can make the die.
Is there a feeling amongst the world out there? Do they like shiny gilt ones, looking ones, or do they like bronze ones?
We can sort of plate them, but it simply makes them too shiny and it costs more. Generally, with these souvenir tokens, generally they sell for about $2. So you know, the production costs you've got to be kept low, so that you can sort of afford to sell them for $2.
Thank you.
John, have you seen any slabs yet? You've been tempted to slab.
Slab tokens. I haven't seen a slab.
Good.
I don't think they can work out.
The slabbing companies only slab things that are in catalogue. So if you can get a catalogue of these tokens printed and send it to the slabbing company, they might consider slabbing them.
I don't know what a slabbing company is. What
A third-party grader. There are companies over in America. You mail them your coins, and they'll grade them for you and send them back to you, all for a fee, of course.
In a plastic.
In a plastic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rudy wanted to ask me a question. Now, make sure this question is not too hard.
Did we go down?
You'll be walking home.
Or sort of a souvenir token of the big banana.
In previous years I have, but I haven't got down there this year yet.
Yeah.
You will
because I
find-
think I was there with you when you got yours a few years ago, and that's, I think the date wasn't on it.
The last one's involved there.
So,
didn't have a
like
date.
I have examples of the big banana from years ago when we do come to the conference, and it had dates on them. You know, like every time we went to a conference here, I used to always go up the street and buy a couple of them. But the ones that they have got now don't have a date on them. So that's what I'm saying. I believe that the people that are making those at the moment went offshore to China.
Yeah.
Because they annoyed the hell out of everybody else in Australia that were making it for them, and they had to go to China.
Okay,
Thank you.
Just as an addition to the we probably wouldn't see it, but it's very big business in Europe. That as my daughter went to Europe, she and the husband, and they toured around, and she came back and she gave me sort of, I think it was 26 or 27 of them. So you go to Chartres Cathedral, and they've got 1, 2, 3 different ones, and you need to put a €2 piece into it, and a little vending machine, and they're just everywhere. there's so many. So it's a time will come very quickly where the activity of collecting these souvenir tokens, that'll be really big.
Well, in 2 years' time at the conference, we'll have to get an extended parking spot for your Rolls Royce, John. On behalf of all of us, we congratulate you.
Sorry. This is George's fault, please, if you want to sort of blame George. Blame George.
You hold the bottom of it, John.
Sorry, Liz.
Right, can I give you these CD of the PowerPoint presentation and the articles of these magazines?
Well, colleagues, would everybody just like to stand up and wriggle their toes for 1 second, if you'd like to, and then we'll reconvene in literally 1 minute.
Got anything about New South Wales? You're not back for the New South Wales Blues again, or Manly Warringah knocked over.
Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought it was.
Only just 50. David scored 50. Gosh.
Every dog has its day.
Exactly.
Yeah, two matches are the middle, so I can scroll up.
And who cares about which one?
So that's two matches in the series.
Yeah, I'd rather.
Well, thank you, colleagues all. Could we reconvene?
Better not try and tell you to blame.
Well, colleagues, it's a special delight to introduce Dr. David Mead. David is well known to us all from his wonderful previous presentations here. A wonderful member of our society. David is a retired electrical engineer and now with Judith, living at Robertson in Southern Highlands here in New South Wales, is a commercial horticulturalist, and David and Judith grow South African and Australian beautiful flowers and Australian native flowers for the commercial florist and horticultural markets. David polished off a PhD at the University of London on control systems, but has been, and after that was a senior academic at the University of New South Wales, particularly in the area of electrical engineering. But David has, as you know, a great passion and expertise in numismatics. Of interest, special interest to historians, and particularly historians of religion, and specifically of the history of Christendom, there is a special interest in the Albigensian Crusades, the only crusade of Christian against Christian. And I think I'm correct in that, David, but we'll hear more about that. It's a great delight to have you here this afternoon and to tell us, with your expertise and this enormous amount of research, on the numismatics of the Albigensian Crusades.
Thank you, John. Just a couple of remarks. First of all, I was very interested in John's talk this morning on the COVID pandemic that we've had in the last couple of years, and I just wanted to add that there's plenty of people like us, and very rich people too, in America and Europe, who are sitting around, not much to do, bored, want to spend some money. The price of classic coins, I would say, and Colin probably confirmed this, is probably doubled over the pandemic period. It's just amazing, because people have put on all these auctions online. You can bid anywhere in the world if you've got a good internet system. Even the NBN allows you to participate in coin auctions in Germany or wherever they have them. And they've all had to go to Zoom because they can't have live auctions any of these places. And of course, the prices have skyrocketed.
You can pay by Bitcoin too.
Yeah. So, yes, Albigensian Crusade. Now that was also inspired by John. Last time, you may remember, John spoke of his experiences in visiting the lovely city, walled city of Carcassonne in southern France. And that was one of the centres, areas of where this crusade took place. Of course, the early crusades, starting with the first crusade, was in Jerusalem. I mean, that was the conquest of the city of Jerusalem. And that was a pretty big deal when Christians from Europe, Western Europe mainly, took themselves a long journey, a very difficult journey to end up in front of the walls of Jerusalem, and that was taken in 1099, a long time ago, when William II was on the throne of England. That's how long ago it was, the second Norman king. And then there's a second crusade. That was the most successful crusade of all, actually. From then on, it was disaster after disaster after disaster. Anyway, we end up at this point in time in the very early 13th century, not long after Richard Lionheart had been to the Third True Crusade, and to try and rescue Jerusalem from the forces of Saladin, unsuccessfully. Judy's going to talk a little bit about what happened to him later on tomorrow, so I won't go to any further than that. But then there was a crusade, the so-called Fourth Crusade, not against Saracens, but actually it was against Christians. The Fourth Crusade was the one where the Crusaders, Western Crusaders and the Venetians went and conquered Constantinople, a Christian city, of course, schismatics, not being Orthodox and separated from the Roman Church. That was one of their excuses. So it was not quite, the Albigensian one was a bit after that, but it turned out that in the reign of King John, we've already heard Gerry mention King John in England, and he also still had some lands in France, that the eastern part of the southern part of France was invaded because they were heretics. You know, a religion had come up which was not Catholic, the orthodoxy of the time, but nevertheless a Christian religion. I won't go too far into what they believed, but nevertheless it was not held in any esteem or at all by the Roman Church, who felt that they had to actively oppose it by killing them. Essentially, that was their remedy for people who wanted to believe something different. Anyway, that's why I've called it a disgraceful legacy, because they exulted in the violence and cruelty that they inflicted on poor people. Okay, Languedoc. It's a pretty place. Anybody been to Languedoc? Yes. It's a fantastic place, as is all of France. I'm a Francophile. I love France. Judy and I had the privilege of, in about the mid-90s or something it was, of a 5-week peregrination on a rented Peugeot right round France. And these are some of the things you see. Here, this side, that is the city of Carcassonne, which John visited, and we visited too. Here's the city of, no, that's the bridge across the, that's Avignon, the Papal Palace, and the old, bridge sur le pont, that story. Above is the town of Albi itself, where the Albigensians were named from, with the fortified cathedral, and the general, beauty of Languedoc looking towards the Pyrenees. So, next one. Okay, before we go to Languedoc proper, where the Crusades were fought, they passed through the city of Nîmes, which is in Languedoc, the extended Languedoc, the city of Nîmes. And this is Roman Languedoc, as it is now. And I just wanted to talk about Nîmes, because we'll hear that it's one of the places the Crusaders passed through. But it is recognised as one of the greatest Roman cities outside Italy, because of its Roman monuments. Look at that beautiful Roman temple on the top right there, the Maison Carrée is called. It used to be the town council buildings in medieval times, and then they have this wonderful arena where they have bullfights. Oh, so southern France and south. And then, of course, the aqueduct across the Gard River, the Pont du Gard. And I thought I'd point out the origins to just generally set Languedoc in its situation. Below that is a coin of Augustus and his and his general. A very interesting coin because it shows here Col Nem, or Nemausus, that's the Roman name for, Latin name for meals, and there's a crocodile chained up to a palm tree. Now what's the significance of that? Well, Nîmes was founded as a colonia, a place for veterans of the Roman army to settle and live after they retired from the army, if they made it. The battle that they're referring to here is the one where Octavian fought against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So here we are, they won of course, the Roman legion won. This is meant to be Egypt chained, that's Cleopatra like pacified, Egyptian pacified, and the Roman legionnaires were settled in this part of France in Nîmes. And so that's just the significance of that Roman coin. But unfortunately, I don't think Nîmes minted any medieval coins at all, even though they were a reasonable big town in those days. All right, next one. Anybody been there? Fantastic place. Yes, fantastic place. Okay. Cathar castles. Now, the name of the heretic group that the Albigensian Crusade was fought against were called Cathars. That was their religion. And they were harmless people. It was a harmless religion. They were vastly put upon, I would say. But here's some pictures here. This is the place is littered with castles like this, which you can go and climb up and look into and so on. You can spend months. And this is a typical coastal area of the Mediterranean coast, where you can see lots of estuaries and lakes, pretty much like the New South Wales coast in that sense. You know, all these coastal lakes, especially down the south coast, that we have. And Toulouse was the big centre of Languedoc. Next one. Okay, I'd like to talk about France and its languages. They did not speak French in Languedoc. French, as it was in those days, you can see this picture of the map of France here, the northern part of France. That's the Languedoc. That's the language where they said oui for yes. This is the Languedoc. This is where the group of languages called Occitan or Languedoc, which means that's where they said oc for yes. Okay, and there's lots of different dialects of Languedoc. And in the middle, this separation, if you like, is where the Massif Central is, the big upland plateau in the middle of France, which sort of separates the north from the south. And it was the south that suffered here. Yeah, and I've written here the various dialects of Occitan. This was the language of the troubadours. This was the language which the Lionheart first learned from his mother Eleanor of Aquitaine. Aquitaine is over here. So that in these days this was English territory. And you can see I've written there the names of the various dialects of Occitan. And they weren't, because people didn't travel so much in those days, they didn't actually understand one another. Even the different dialects were not that easy to understand from one to the other. So a Gascon person would struggle in Provence and so on. One thing I should also say about France in those days is that the borders of France were vastly different to what they are now. The Rhone was the border of eastern France. Everything on the other side of the Rhone, including Provence and Dauphiné and Savoy and all of that, that belonged to the Holy Roman Empire, not France. France over the years gradually won it and got it by hook or by crook, but in those days no. So this was the border of the Rhone, which is sort of down, that's it. This is the Rhone coming down, and Provence was that side, and Languedoc this side. Okay, next one. This is a very important map, this. Here we are. This was the general area where the crusade was fought. We'll see over here, where are we now? A couple of better ones. Here's Carcassonne, just to put that. Béziers we'll find is an important town, Narbonne, a Roman town, Narbo, the capital of Roman Septimania, the years before. and Toulouse up here. But this was, up here was sort of the territory of Aquitaine, which was nominally owned by the English, although at this point they were being hard pressed to keep. So that's the time of the Crusade, and here we see the Rhone coming down here, the Alps of the Rhone, and County of Provence here, as distinct from the Marquisate of Provence here, the Principality of Orange. Yeah, it's a really lovely holiday country. Next one. Okay, when this heresy started, and no one really knows how it started, but nevertheless it got serious, and the Pope Innocent III, anything but innocent from his name, but nevertheless, maybe the Pope's one of Innocent I and second had used it all up by then. He was absolutely dogmatic that they must be suppressed, and he was the one who launched a crusade against them. Next. The Albigensians actually went to the Pope, and they pleaded their case with him. He wasn't too impressed. As the next slide shows, he basically set the dogs on them, and set the army on them and fought them. And he launched this crusade, and I don't know, the map's very important here. He launched this crusade, and this little map here is a similar area to what we've seen. Shows the path of the Crusaders as they came from northern France, and basically more mercenaries, led by a man called Simon de Montfort, which we'll have to say a little bit about. But he, you can see the journey. This was typical French journey. They'd come down via the Rhone Valley, and he was, you see, came down from Montélimar, where they make wonderful nougat, through Orange, Avignon, and then launched out Nîmes, which we showed you a little bit about, Montpellier, big university town now, Béziers, and Béziers was where a big centre of Catharism, and they absolutely launched the big battles and took the town essentially, and dispossessed the current Viscount, who was also Viscount of Coxon. And you can see too the colours of the map. In fact, all the orange was not even subject to France. They were, the head of the orange bit, if you like, was the King of Aragon and Count of Barcelona. So they were Spaniards, the Catalonians basically. And you see Perpignan's right down here, which was a Spanish town or an Aragonese town for a long time. Whereas the Count of Toulouse lived up in here. Toulouse, was it gone?
Straight ahead.
I missed it there.
That's it. That's it.
Here we are, Toulouse. And no, that's it. I can't see it on the map.
Just
it's
where you had
too
it.
close. You'll see it there anyway. That was all his territory, but he had viscounts who occupied other areas too. So Béziers, for instance, this area, the blue was his. This was under the viscounts. Carcassonne also there. The King of Aragon, which we'll talk about in a minute, he believed that a lot of this country was also his, and he felt that he was being invaded. So he very much, even though all the leaders of the various counts and viscounts and so on, they weren't Cathars, but they supported them because they realised it wasn't anything to do with religion, this invasion. It was a land grab from the northern French, and so they opposed him. Yeah. All right. County of Provence, you see here, Marquisate of Provence here. We'll come to that when we come to the coins, if you know what I'm talking about. Next slide. Oh, sorry, coins, okay. French coinage is divided into two lots. Coins the kings made, the kings of France made, that's called the royal coinage. And coins which were made by the local bishop or the count or the viscount or whatever, that's called the feudal coinage. And they're catalogued separately and collected separately, although they're clearly related in time. So we'll start with the local coinage of Toulouse before and during the time of the Albigensian Crusade. I show on the top here, oh, by the way, they're all in the little case over there. These, no, not all, the ones that would fit. the obol of Toulouse under Raymond VI. You'll hear me talk about him. He was the Count of Toulouse at the time of the Crusade. Another one of his, which was a denier, and an earlier denier, which was an immobilised type. So that's what they look like. They didn't mint gold coins, or nothing gold or valuable, and certainly the poor people who were the Cathars, they didn't anything much at all. But there was nevertheless probably a lot of barter economy, but they still used coinage. So that's Toulouse, and that's the three I've got from Toulouse. Next one. Okay, here are some important coins from the various towns that got under siege. This one in particular, I'm very proud to have a coin of Carcassonne. So you can see, even see the legend, Carcassonne, and the civitas on the other side. That's slightly earlier than the period at which the Crusades taking place, but you might imagine minting took a second seat to when the actual wars were going on and they had to defend themselves against the invaders. This one here, Roger the Second of Béziers. That's a coin of little denier of Béziers. This one here, probably the most important coin of the whole region, called the Melgorian. That was minted in Melguel, which is a part of Greater Montpellier now, and that seemed to circulate everywhere. It's imitated by imitating a coin of Narbonne. These four little amulets there are typically Narbonne symbol. I don't have a coin of this period of Narbonne, but that was circulated everywhere through Languedoc, and it's a sort of an immobilised type. And then this one over this side, that's a coin of Albi. Albi's an interesting town. Anyone been to Albi? We have, yes. The coin of that's La Perouse's hometown. This is the explorer. Also Toulouse-Lautrec, he came from Albi. So it's an important town, important people, and right in the centre of there on the river, right in the centre of Languedoc, on the River Tarn, which flows into the Garonne. Next one. Okay, slightly north. Those two coins on the top, only one of which is in the tray, the top one there, from place towards the Cevennes, from outside Nîmes, called Anduze and Sauve. They minted coins together. This one, the Archbishop, or Bishop, sorry, of Viviers, and this one, a coin of Rodez, which was also an Albigensian town and under attack. And next one. And here we are. Notice I distinguish between the Marquisate of Provence and the County of Provence. Here's one of the County of Provence, which was governed and ruled by a cadet branch of the Aragonese kings. It was actually Aragonese at that time, and they ruled from Marseille, Alfonso II. This one is a coin of the Marquisate of Provence, which was the Marquis of Provence at that time was also the Count of Toulouse. So this is a coin of Raymond VI, and interestingly, this little badge here is now currently on the badge of Languedoc. And they want a shield of Languedoc, a coat of arms. That's what they use. This sort of little cross, but with the 3 points, three little knobs on each arm of the cross. So that's that. And the sun and the moon, lovely coin. I like that one. And the one on the right there, that's the Archbishop of Arles. It's from Arles itself, right at the top of the delta of the Rhone. All of this was under attack and featured in the story of the Albigensian Crusade. Next one. And last, I mentioned Peter II of Aragon. Peter II married, his wife was the lady governor, if you like, of Montpellier. So Peter regarded Montpellier, that town, as his town. And they had a son together. And she bore Peter a son whose name was James. And James became very famous. James I, nicknamed the Conqueror, conquered the Balearic Islands from forces of Islam, and they became Aragonese territory. And anywhere, and Valencia too, he added that to the Crown of Aragon. And anywhere that he conquered in those days, now they speak Catalan as their main language. So the Balearic Islands speak Catalan, obviously the Catalonia does, Valencia does, all slightly different dialects, but they can understand one another, and it's a very distinct language from the main Castilian language which we call Spanish. But this one here is a coin of Peter from Barcelona. This one's a coin of Aragon, which is actually a little portrait coin, and you can see it just says Petrus Rex Aragon, and a little emblem of Aragon, which is a cross with branches coming out of it, supposed to be a miracle from Christ. And this is a most important coin and a very rare coin, and a very early grow, or groat you might call it, of Montpellier. And that's the emblem of Montpellier in the middle there, and it will say, and this is one of James the son, not of Peter himself, Jacobus, I'll try and translate too much, but you know, he's basically king of Aragon, Aragonum, Rex Aragonum, and this one is Dominus Montes Pissolanu, which was like the closest they get to the Latin name for the city of Montpellier. A very scarce and rare coin. I had to get a special permission to get that out of Spain. Just to, yes, it's regarded as one of the historical artefacts. But it's significant because of its position in the Albigensian Crusade. Okay, so you can see that the big issue with the Crusade was not so much the coinage is a secondary thing, but the whole Crusade itself, which lasted right up to, you might say, 1229. So from the first Crusade, about 20 years, this crusade was going on, and it had its stops. I mean, the crusading period was really only in the summer, too cold, so the Crusaders went back to northern France, came down the next summer, you know, sacked a few castles, killed a few, burnt a few Cathars, more than a few, and yeah, and just go to the next slide. I think it might be actually it, but oh no, this is important. Cathar castles. That's another great activity you can do in Languedoc. All these castles scattered along the northern side of the Pyrenees. Judy and I had when we were out, much fitter, scaled the hill that Pépetus was on, and fantastic views from all of these things and so on. But that's an important thing. And probably some of the villages that really got wrecked was Terne, Minerve, yeah, Carcassonne. See, that's the lower part. But this is an important thing because Montségur was a place where the remnants of the Cathars that hadn't already been killed were trapped on a mountain castle, and really ultimately they were betrayed, and the French Crusaders took the castle. All the Cathars came out and virtually threw themselves into the flames of a big bonfire that the Crusaders had prepared for them. Nice. Okay, I'll just talk a little bit about the display, because you'll see there's a map there of some of the events. Oh yeah, this is it, Montségur, the last stand and fall. This what remains today. Yeah, next. No, that's it, all right. Yes, 1229, I did make a slide of this, but eventually Raymond was vilified all the way through. Not a Cathar, but he was always told he wasn't doing enough to suppress Catharism, and eventually he died in 1222. His son Raymond VII took over, and he had to go to Paris and there talk to the current king, who was only a boy, but his mother, Blanche of Castile, and the young Louis IX, who became St. Louis, and Judy will talk a bit about that tomorrow. He had to sign a treaty saying he promised his daughter to the brother of the King of France, and he would allow to remain Count of Toulouse and Marquis of Provence. No, not even the Marquis of Provence, the Count of Toulouse in his lifetime, and then the brother of St. Louis would hold it, and it became French. And that was the end. And then the whole thing. And the history of Languedoc is that the later French, they now owned it, having defeated the Occitanians, and they enforced the French language upon them. even though it wasn't their language. People still speak Occitan, and it's got a bit of a revival now. It is not the same language as Catalan, but it is close, it's related. Catalan is not a dialect of Occitan, vice versa, but they're close, and they're probably even closer in the Middle Ages. Yep, next. Anything more?
That's
it.
the last one.
Okay, yeah, just a little note on the displays. I've got some books there. The original story was written from the Crusader point of view. The Cathars left no documents which is their point of view of the whole crusade. And this is written terribly one-eyed. I've held the book there. The name of the man who wrote it is Pierre or Peter of Les Vaux de Cernay. He was a Cistercian monk, very pro, church, exalted in the burning of heretics. It's very, it's an interesting story just the same, but it's hard to swallow if you start to read this. Whereas some of the more modern accounts, which I've put books there, especially the one by Jonathan Sumption, who's a wonderful English writer, writes all about the Crusade and puts it in perspective. Whereas this is, you've got to have everything thick in your mind, all the personalities you read the original, but this is a translation of the original book. And I've got lucky to have a lovely poster over in the corner there, which I purchased and have had for many years. It shows Peter, the chronicler, on the corner of the map there, and it gives a little pictorial representation of some of the ghastly events that happened in the Crusade. I mean, they love, for instance, it was very popular from women, this, because they had this concept of being a perfect. If you were a perfect, you had to have no sex from then on, so women didn't mind having it, but men only had it on their deathbed typically. And but they were the ones who the Crusaders really wanted to persecute. So the lady of Minerve, who was a Cathar perfect, she was thrown down a well and she was stoned to death. They just threw stones on top of her. She died. That's the typical punishment. Whereas her husband was hanged in the conquest of Minerve. I must say, looking at I don't know if anyone saw the Four Corners last week about the Canadian journalist documenting Afghanistan. I thought Albigensian Crusade, the whole sorry episode. Here, this big army of foreigners come in, trying to tell all the locals how to, run their lives, and it ended in failure. Whereas this ended in some success, but only at the expense of the locals. What do I have to say?
Thank you very much, David. Very humbling to hear about these things, but it's so important to hear about these things. We can see them with the perspective of 700 years now, of a lens of perhaps more realistic viewing. Open for questions and debate, discussion.
I've got a question. David, when you went... Sorry.
You mentioned Simon de Montfort, and you said that you're going to make a reference to it later, and we hadn't heard it.
Simon de Montfort.
Sorry, yes. Look, I must admit, I've written two papers. One is just pictures, which I've shown you, and I've written more extensively about some of these issues. Simon de Montfort. He was the leader of the Crusader. He was a Frenchman. Those of you who have studied English history and read about Henry III, Simon de Montfort featured quite heavily in the Barons' revolt against Henry III. Now, Simon de Montfort in England was the son of Simon de Montfort, the Albigensian Crusade leader. I should have said that. And interestingly, the Simon de Montfort, they had an English peerage. They were Earls of Richmond, which was the area in Yorkshire. But the younger Simon de Montfort also became Earl of Leicester. And Leicester University today, what is it called? De Montfort University, DMU. It's amazing. He wasn't all bad, but he was defeated by Henry and his younger son, who became Edward I, the conqueror of Wales and Scotland and all sorts of things. So, that's the story of de Montfort in England. But de Montfort in France, and you'll see once again back to the poster, the knight in the corner of the opposite corner of the left-hand bottom corner, that is a depiction of Simon de Montfort. And he was eventually killed outside Toulouse. Yes, I should have mentioned this interesting fact too. Simon de Montfort, on his way through Montpellier, that's where James, as a baby, was, and he just found out, and he took him hostage essentially. This was what really got up the nose of his father Peter, who was ruling in Barcelona. And he tried to marry him off to his younger daughter, who was a similar age, maybe a couple of years later. That never happened because there was a complaint to the Pope about that, and the Pope ordered de Montfort to give up the young king, or the young prince at that point. But his father, in 1213, he died because he was fighting Simon de Montfort in this place called Muret, just south of Toulouse. And even though the Crusaders were outnumbered, they lost. They won. And the King Peter, who was disguised, he wanted to fight as a knight. You see, he didn't want anybody to know he was a king. So he was sort of right in the front line, but he got killed. And that was the end of Peter, and hence the young prince came to the throne at a young age and lived for a long time.
Thank you. John.
David, when you and Judith were touring around France, in those various castles, were there any that you could stay in?
Yeah, well, we tried to stay in Carcassonne, the old city. Unfortunately, it was occupied by a whole troop of school kids, and we couldn't get in there, so we just stayed outside the old city. But yes, I'm sure there would have been. But we
I can speak for that, David. If anybody, if I could interrupt, if anybody wants to visit these parts, the Ryanair and those, there'll be cheap airlines when the COVID story is over. I got a return flight from London to Carcassonne 3 years ago, for £79. So it's wonderful. And you can stay. There's cheap digs there. Just get off the plane and walk up the street, and there's bed and breakfast everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but like when you have actual castles,
yeah,
you go into the castle. Like a lot of them are in ruins.
A lot of
now.
them are ruins. So yes, they're all visitable.
But there are some that have been renovated into hotels and motels.
Not in the
there are some.
Yeah. Well, Carcassonne is a city inside the castle there.
Yes.
It's a village with all these things, museums and streets and restaurants and.
I mean, let me tell you this. When we were there, we leased this little Peugeot at Charles de Gaulle Airport, and we had a few bookings made because we thought what might be difficult to stay. No. Eventually we decided, no, we'll just, every night, wherever we were, we'll find a little 2-3 star hotel, preferably one which gave a wonderful fixed price menu for dinner, and that's how we travel. It was easy as pie.
Okay.
Well, I think if one of the legacies of a conference like this, of course, is to stimulate our thoughts of doing it in the future. Judith.
David, I remember you mentioning to me, reading from one of those books that you've got there, about the reaction of the citizens of various towns to the invaders.
Well, how we go for time?
Well, we must stop in the next minute or so.
A couple of minutes. You're right. I did want to, thanks for reminding me, I did want to just quote a little bit of the story that written at the time by the original chronicle. After the Battle of Muret, one little quote here. This section titled "The Count Goes to Provence." So he wanted to go on, the Count being Simon de Montfort. Provence was outside the Languedoc area, but nevertheless he wanted to go there because there were some uprisings there. He said, and this is where he was roughly at Toulouse, he accordingly made for Narbonne, accompanied by the Crusaders who had joined him. The citizens of Narbonne had always been hostile to Christ's business and opposed its prosecution on many occasions, albeit in an underhand way. So you see Narbonne citizens, regardless of Cathars or not, they weren't Cathars in Narbonne, but they didn't like the idea of the Crusaders visiting him. It goes on. They could not be persuaded to allow entry into the city for the Count and the Crusaders, or even the Crusaders without the Count, so they were compelled to pass the night of their arrival in the fruit gardens and woods outside the walls. So Narbonne didn't want them. The next day they proceeded to Béziers, which they'd previously conquered, and in 2 days reached Montpellier, whose inhabitants, rivalling those of Narbonne in hostility, also refused to allow the Count and the men into the city to spend the night. Indeed, the Montpellier followed the behaviour of Narbonne in every aspect. Leaving Montpellier, the Crusaders came to Nîmes, and at first the citizens refused to allow the Count into the town. But you know, they were starting to put up a fuss this time, so they let them in. But that is typical. You see, nobody down in the south of France and any of those important places wanted them at all. They were entirely inflicted on them.
David, we've delighted in your encyclopedic knowledge, and I think you've whetted a lot of appetites for us to visit this part of France. On behalf of us all, of course, the conference bell.
Thank you very much.
And we'll break now for afternoon tea, resuming at 3:30. The expert and lecturer, John lectured for many years at Charles Sturt University in Wagga. John now lives in near Foster on the east coast, north of here. South here, sorry.
It's a New South Boston. I remember that.
John, born in Limerick, of course, and it's wonderful with that background to talk to us this afternoon about Celtic motifs in modern numismatic pieces, the metaphors of Celtic history and heritage in the hobby which we love so much. John,
Thank you very much, John. Thank you. Well, perhaps I should begin by saying that the word Celtic, or Celtic as some people pronounce it, especially in Scotland, is a somewhat disputed term. The matter of what constituted or constitutes a Celt, what we mean by the word Celtic, has been much debated among scholars in recent decades, and it continues to be rather controversial. The British numismatist Chris Rudd refuses to use the term Celtic of coins produced in Britain. He points out that, quite rightly, that Greek and Roman writers often do say Celtic when referring to the continent, but never use the word referring to Britain. But despite Rudd and the scholarly specialists, the view that there were continental Celts during the time when ancient Greece and Rome flourished, and insular Celts whose culture reached great heights in Britain and Ireland during the early Middle Ages, and that the two are connected, remains a widespread one, and it is likely to influence those numismatists who take any interest in things Celtic. My approach today would be to regard as Celtic anything pertaining to those people of Iron Age and Roman period continental Europe, widely regarded as being Celtic, and also those of Iron Age Roman and early Christian Britain and Ireland, sometimes referred to as the insular Celts. However, although I'll notice Celtic inscriptions on coins, I will not regard something as Celtic mainly because it is Scottish, Welsh, Irish, etc. Thus, for example, I won't consider coins which portray the singer John McCormack on an Irish coin, or the Menai Bridge in Wales on a British coin, or Sir Walter Scott on a British coin also, honouring the Scot, of course. And of course, as my title suggests, I'm not going to venture into the rich but demanding field of ancient Celtic coins. I'll begin with the coins of the Irish Free State and the Republic, since official Ireland has placed a great emphasis on its Celtic heritage. I should then consider the United Kingdom, and then the Isle of Man, which is, most of you I suppose would know, has a Celtic background, and Manse is a Celtic language. And of course the Isle of Man has produced a great many coins over the years. I would then consider continental Europe before looking briefly at 4 countries outside Europe which have issued coins with a Celtic theme. Ireland first. When the Irish Free State came into being in 1922, the coins of the United Kingdom continued to flourish. continued to be used, and indeed they would continue to be used throughout the island of Ireland until 1979. But following a vote of the Irish Parliament in 1926, as Gerry has pointed out to us, a committee was set up to consider a new design for Irish coinage to circulate beside the British one. The chair of the committee was the famous poet William Butler Yeats. At this stage in his life, the poet's ardour for things Celtic had somewhat diminished, and he urged that the models for the new coins be sought in the coinage of ancient Greece. A decision was reached that the new coins would portray the animals and birds of the Irish countryside and farmyard. And the artists were asked to base their designs for these animals on ancient Greek coins, of which they were sent photographs. The result was that the coins, which were designed by the Englishman Percy Metcalfe, which were put into circulation in 1928, which remained in circulation until decimalisation in 1971, with a change of inscription from Source.Éireann to Éire when the Free State became the Republic in 1937. The result was that they portrayed pigs, hare, hens, a sheep, a wolfhound, etc. They did all feature on their obverse the so-called Brian Boru harp, which with one exception has appeared on all Irish coins since 1922. But of course the harp was not a new, not an innovation on Irish coinage. We've seen several examples already today of earlier Irish coins with celts with harps on them. And in fact it dates back to Henry VIII in the 16th century. The new coins, as you can see, employed the Irish language in their inscriptions. But otherwise, I think there's not very much that you could say is distinctly Celtic about them. Only one commemorative coin appeared in the 60 years from 1928. And this was the coin issued in 1966 to mark the 50 years of the Easter Rebellion, the Easter Rising, which marked the beginning of more or less modern independent Ireland. This coin portrayed the leader of the 1916 revolt. It didn't last very long, it was put down in 5 days. Padraig Pearse on one side, and on the other side, with the words in Irish, 5 shillings, it portrays a statue in Dublin of the dying Cuchulainn, the ancient Irish hero. But it's clearly a statue in classical style. There's nothing Celtic about the style of the coin, I think one has to say. Things did get a bit more Celtic. Celtic things got a bit more of a look in when Ireland joined Britain in going decimals in 1971. The animal designs were retained for most of the new coins. However, the new bronze coins featured designs from what were regarded as medieval Celtic manuscripts, such as the Book of Kells, and you can see them here. These are quite distinctively Celtic sort of designs from book illustrations. Not all of them in Ireland, one of them's in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, actually. But this was not the unequivocal sign of a new Celtic dawn for Irish coinage that it might at first have appeared. The abandonment of the Metcalfe designs was controversial in Ireland and quite unpopular. I can remember an uncle of mine saying exactly that to me when I visited at the time. And in June 1990, the Irish Ministry of Finance announced that they would revert to the animal designs for the bronze coins that were still in circulation. The halfpenny had been demonetised by this stage. However, this was all shelved when Ireland decided to join the euro and go over to euro coinage. So the abandoned animals never did return. In the period from the advent of decimalisation to the switch over to the euro, Ireland issued only 3 commemorative coins, 2 of them for general circulation and 1 solely for coin collectors. The 50 pence for the Dublin Millennium in 1988 was completely, had no Celtic significance at all. It had a heraldic shield on it. And the coin issued in 1995, to mark 50 years of the United Nations, had a dove of peace on it. Nothing Celtic about that also. More interesting in the present context is a punt or pound issued for commemoration in 2000 to mark the millennium. It featured the so-called Broiter boat held in the National Museum of Ireland, thought to date from about the time of Christ, and regarded as a Celtic artefact. I have to say that this design was not greeted with immense adulation. Some wit commented it looked like a piece of melon with a few cocktail sticks sticking into it, but it is a little boat from the Irish Museum. Since the introduction of the euro, Ireland has, on a pretty modest scale really, adopted the common practice of issuing high-value gold and silver coins designed for the collector market. A few of the silver coins have had Celtic themes, notably a rather fussy 10 euro coin in 2007 said to celebrate, quote, Ireland's Celtic heritage in Europe, whatever that might mean, and a much better, I think, 2011 coin featuring St. Brendan the Navigator, who was the Irish candidate for having discovered America. A series of tiny gold coins, 11 to 14 millimeters in diameter, have been issued on a variety of these with Celtic subjects, a Celtic cross, Irish monastic art, the Irish hero Brian Boru, etc. But this homage to a Celtic heritage has not been reflected in the circulating 2 euro coins Ireland has issued. The 2016 centenary of the Easter Rising saw a special coin issued for circulation, but again the theme is completely classical. That's a statue on the top of the GPO in Dublin, which was the centre of of Easter week, the Rising week. Okay, could I turn now to the United Kingdom? There's said to be a Celtic element in the standard United Kingdom £2 coin issued from 1997 until they abandoned it in 2014 when Britannia came back. It's said to have reflect technological development, and the inner circle is said to be Celtic, which I suppose it is in a vague sort of way. But a much better place to look for Celtic influence is in the various £1 coins that were issued to celebrate the 4 constituent parts of the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Edge inscriptions on the Welsh coins, which I won't display, have words in the Welsh language. The red dragon shows the way, proud I am of my country, etc. But the more interesting one probably is the one to celebrate Northern Ireland. This also shows an element from the Broiter boat. The Broiter boat is now in Dublin, but it was actually discovered in what is now Northern Ireland before the split in 1921. So in a curious way, Northern Ireland and the Republic have been linked by this coin, probably quite unintentionally. Turning now to the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man has been accused of ignoring Manx subjects in its coinage in favour of non-Manx subjects and themes likely to appeal to the collector market, for which its coin production is closely focused. But Manx elements are not entirely lacking from coins that circulated on the island. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, the Manx name for the Isle of Man, Ellen Vannon, has appeared on a few coins. That's a twopence. And there was also another one which I don't think I've portrayed, which had a few words in Manx of a Manx seaman's hymn, Peer us, O Lord. When the Isle of Man went over to decimal currency in 1971, the new penny design on the left, used until 1975, featured a Celtic cross. As has often been the case with the Isle of Man, as many of you would know, this was available in bronze for circulation and in a number of precious metals for the collector market, silver and platinum in this case. The tuppence has been identified as having a Celtic design. Perhaps it has. It's pretty limited, I think, if you would have to say. And a 50p celebrated Christianity in Man, which was a clearly Celtic cross. That was issued in 2001. The name of the Isle of Man has been associated with the Celtic god Macmannan Maclear. He's the sea god and the god of the underworld in Celtic mythology. He featured on a 1998 silver coin for collectors, denominated in euros, so definitely for collectors, because it was before the introduction of the euro widely. And again in 2019 on a rather more impressive 3-ounce silver coin. That's in there. The 2019 initiative, although the price was rather breathtakingly high, was apparently successful because they imitated it again the next year and again in 2021. In 2020, they showed the hero, the British hero Boudicca, the Queen of the Iceni. Have we got that? Yes. Boudicca, the warrior queen, who, as you probably know, led a revolt against Rome and was successful for a while. And this year, I don't have a picture of this, but they have one showing the rather mysterious Celtic god Carnunnos. He's if you've ever seen pictures, he has horns on his head. It looks rather sinister. Modern Ireland, independent Ireland, has never issued a coin for St. Patrick. Lots of stamps, but never a coin. But the Isle of Man has made up the deficit. Here we have St. Patrick on a coin of the Isle of Man, a crown, as so many of their coins are. And it looks like he is trying to get rid of snakes, as of course one of St. Patrick's best known activities, at least in legend. There were never any snakes in Ireland, actually. It should be emphasised, I suppose, that the Isle of Man has issued an immense number of coins. I think if you look in Krauss, the Isle of Man section for the 20th century is the thickest of all the sections, despite the fact that the Isle has a population of about 50,000 people. Its Celtic influence, its Celtic coinage production is a small part of its overall production. And it has also produced quite a considerable number of Viking coins, because they also regard themselves as having a Viking heritage. Okay, turning to continental Europe now. It's logical here, I think, to begin with France, famously the land of the Celts. In 2012, the Gallic hero Vercingetorix was honoured on a €10 coin celebrating the Auvergne in a series devoted to French regions and territories. An ancient coin is also, you can probably see in the corner there on that coin. In 2000, before the euro, a coin of the ancient Parisi tribe had been reproduced in a series of coins celebrating 2 millennia of French coinage. More recently, in 2016, a design based on an ancient coin showing Vercingetorix appeared on a French €10 coin as part of a series celebrating French coins through history. You were able to buy it in a little thing like that. It's base silver, basically. It wasn't very expensive. But the ancient Celt most celebrated by far of French coinage is Asterix the Gaul, somebody who never probably existed. He and his associates were honoured on seven different gold and silver coins in 2007, and by 3 different gold and silver coins in 2013. In 2015, 24 different asterisk €10 coins and 2 different asterisk 50 euro coins appeared. The claim was that they were demonstrating how Asterix and his friends embodied the values of the Republic: liberté, égalité, fraternité. And you could buy them like this. I think you got them actually for 10 euros, the face value. The silver is debased, though, it's not perfect silver. And you were encouraged to buy them and mount them in a special album. I've just illustrated 2 of them, a liberté and an égalité one. And they weren't done, actually, at this stage. In 2019, a new book a new comic book featuring Asterix came out, La Fille de Vercingetorix, and they issued a coin for that. And more recently, a 2 euro coin was issued. Unfortunately, I couldn't bring it along because I left it in Sydney. Three coins, 2 euro coins, again celebrating Asterix. Well, more precisely, celebrating 60 years of the Asterix comics. So you could say Asterix has been pretty heavily honoured in France, and that I suppose it is a tribute to their Celtic heritage, but a somewhat attenuated one would have to say, all about somebody who never really existed. Otherwise, continental Europe offers pretty lean pickings when you're looking for Celtic themes. From 1993 to 2008, Slovakia placed the coin of the Celtic hero Beatek on its 5 koron coin. Beatek was prominent around Bratislava around the 1st century BC. Other than that, Austria, I don't have pictures of this, but Austria issued a coin showing a Celtic miner on a commemorative coin. Italy portrayed the Tara cross from the National Museum of Ireland on a tiny gold coin, a part of the series. But otherwise, that's about it in continental Europe. The rest of the world, 4 rather unlikely countries outside the Europe have issued coins with a Celtic theme. In 2010, the Democratic Republic of the Congo issued for collection a set of 16 coins commemorating warriors of the world. Clearly for collectors, they speak French there if they don't speak native languages, but the language is in English. What period of Celt this is anybody's guess. Then Chad, landlocked Chad in North Africa in 2019 issued a series of 5 coins portraying Celtic animals. I include this mainly because the motifs on the coin, on the body of the animal, seems to be vaguely Celtic. Again, clearly for collectors, they were made of silver. Fiji in 2016 issued the second in a series of Mandela art coins with a design said to reflect the, quote, Celts' love of geometric decoration. This was a 3-ounce silver coin adorned with a piece of malachite in the middle and of course issued at a rather dramatic price. If you want one now, you'd probably pay about $1,500. And much the same sort of observation can be made of the final of the coins I'd like to look at. Tiny Nue in 2020 issued a coin incorporating some Celtic motifs in the middle especially. It's meant to represent the Celtic calendar. What relation that has to ancient Celts is a little bit dubious. Okay, in conclusion, some years ago I gave a paper at a different conference on Viking motifs in coins, and I discovered there was vastly more material. Quite a number of countries in Europe have issued Viking coins, in Scandinavia, but also some of the others. And the list of others that I know of that have produced Viking coins reads as follows. The United States, Canada, Benin, the Cook Islands, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Falkland Islands, the Marshall Islands, Laos, Niue, the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, the Solomon Islands, Tonga, Tuvalu, and Zambia. Why have the Celts been far less popular than the Vikings? Well, I can think of a number of possible reasons. The Vikings have had a much higher historical profile. The Celts did attack the Roman Empire and were quite prominent in the sort of Celtic fringes that sometimes pejoratively called in Britain, but they didn't have the same influence as the Vikings. The Celts also didn't produce the Viking ship, that powerful, redolent, menacing symbol which has appeared on so many coins, and which is fairly easy to portray on a coin also. And I think perhaps the clinching factor, despite St. Brendan, the Celts failed to produce Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red. And he, of course, is regarded as the person who discovered America, and that's where a lot of money coin collectors live. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, John Kennedy. We're delighted in that story. Thank you. Questions? Discussion?
I can make a little interesting comment, I think, about Vikings in the Isle of Man.
Could you speak up, Colin?
Yes, I will. The Vikings in the Isle of Man. In the early middle 70s, a gentleman came to Australia who was probably the foremost Anglo-Saxon numismatist in the world at that time, a man called Michael Doyle. Michael Doyle was then professor at Queen's University in Belfast. And I had to pick him up at the airport, and he was teaching for 6 months sabbatical up at New England University at Armidale. The interesting thing was that when he landed, we were chatting about different things, and we became reasonably good friends, even though he's a controversial medievalist Anglo-Saxon numismatist and historian. I said, well, how did he trip out to Australia? And he said, well, it was very interesting. I sat on the plane reading the Isle of Man telephone music. And the gentleman next to me started to scratch his head and looked at me and said, what are you doing? He said, I'm reading the telephone directory. He said, well, why do you read the telephone directory on a plane trip from England to Australia? He said, because I'm looking for Viking names and I'm marking them off. And he actually did a fairly substantial discovery that most of the names that originate in the Isle of Man were Viking. Now, I don't know whether you knew much about the Celtic names, but certainly there are a lot of Viking names in the Isle of Man, which sort of substantiate the Vikings were active in the Isle of Man. And I thought it was an interesting anecdote because Michael Doyle was controversial, but still a very famous numismatist in his own right.
They issued a lot of Viking ship coins in several different designs at one stage. So yes.
Yeah, it's just an interesting comment.
That's fascinating, actually.
My name, family patron in Pern, is a Cornish name, but I don't identify with Celtic things in Cornwall, although it, of course, was Celtic.
It's one of the 6 Celtic nations.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. I don't think its Celtic heritage is certainly not marked in a coin. It's never reached a stamp, actually.
No, I don't think so.
There's an attempt to revive the Cornish language, I believe, which is, like Manx, is now defunct. Manx lasted into the lifetime of many of us. The last native speaker died in the 60s. But Cornish has been on for a couple of centuries, I think.
It's my family name, Pern, is Cornish for the hawthorn tree.
Ah.
And I have a granddaughter called Willow, so she's tree. Gerry.
Well, my name's Doyle, which of course is the Dark Strange, which is actually from...
The Dark
Strange.
That's Viking, isn't it?
It's a Viking name,
yes.
And we were responsible for a lot of raping and pillaging in Ireland.
Indeed, yes.
According to the history.
The Dark Strangers and the
Dark
Strangers, yes.
And the other, being Gerald, of course, he's a spear thrower, so look out.
My name is Kennedy either means helmeted head or ugly head. Both interpretations, I prefer the first one.
What was that, John?
My name, Kennedy, is either helmeted head or ugly head.
Is anybody else going to confess?
I'm sure the Benjamin diaspora out of Israel got there at some stage.
John,
can I just add to that? I do a lot of family history, and just to check out the DNA ancestry stuff, and I've actually done the DNA, and actually it's quite accurate. It does show that I've got Scandinavian ancestry from somewhere. So that's obviously probably the Viking connection.
I understand that 1 in 3 Australians identify with Irish ancestry.
That's what I said.
Right.
Yes. So of course we have 2 parents, 4 grandparents, 8 1632, 64, 128, 256, and so it goes on. And so many of us can claim
I
Irish.
think it was partly because they brought out a lot of young women from Ireland to sort of balance up the gender ratio. That was what available to marry, so to speak.
Yes, well, it lifted the tone of Australia. John, on behalf of us all, a wonderful presentation. Thank you
very much.
Thank you so much. Well, colleagues, it's a great pleasure to introduce a personal friend and professional colleague, Phil Benjamin, to give us our next presentation. Many of us know Phil and his wife, Dr. Julie Benjamin, who's here with us today and has been with us for previous conferences as well. Julie, a consultant radiologist in her own right. Phil is a retired rural surgeon, graduate in medicine from the University of Sydney, 3 years working as a surgeon in New Zealand, then in the United Kingdom, and for 21 years was a much respected and esteemed general rural surgeon based in Kingaroy in Queensland. And of course, rural surgeons are required to be eye surgeons, brain surgeons, abdominal surgeons, plastic surgeons, a lot. And there's, I'm sure, many thousands of families that bless Phil for his skill and care in Kingaroy over that time. Phil is the acknowledged Australian authority on Cook Numismatica, and perhaps one of the two international authorities on Cook Numismatica. And next weekend, Phil is an invited guest speaker at the Cook big National Cook Conference in Cooktown, which was delayed last year but is being held next week, literally next weekend in Cooktown. And Julie and Phil will be going up there, Phil as an invited speaker, speaking about Cook Numismatica on that occasion. But we've heard Phil talking about Cook Numismatics in the past, but that's not his theme today. Today he's going to be telling us about the medalist Percy Metcalfe. Phil Benjamin.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thanks, everybody. We've heard quite a bit today about other collectibles like tokens and things. You may have noticed my other coin-like collections up top in things. They're the Flacco Musophily. That's the plates on the top of sparkling wine, or the Stelvin cap, which is, I think, an Australian invention, and they fit very well into a $10 Kmart picture frame. So there's some up there for interest. We're giving one of them to our boys for their birthday or Christmas presents, and those are very expensive presents because each cap represents 16 bucks. Anyway, today it's Percy Metcalfe. Born 14th of January 1895, died 9th of October 1970. He was active mostly from 1920 to 46, born in England, sculptor, medal, coin and seal designer. Now I found it interesting, his probate date was the 27th of January 71, and his wealth at death after all this time and producing things was £1,973, no shillings, no pence. So either he lived up to his income, or he was a good manager and managed to ship it all to his kids before the tax man got to it. One or the other. Anyway, he studied art at Leeds and in 1914 attended Royal College of Art, London. Primarily known for working medals and coins, however, during the 30s, he also produced designs for the theatre and sculptures. Next slide, please. And here he presented this lift gates for Austin Reed Fashion House. That was a new building at the time and was called Summit House. And you can see his artistic Art Deco influence in the summits on the gate, the lift gates. His work shows a great influence of geometric design and bright colours of the Art Deco period. The style prominent in the pre-war years and into the 20s, but became more subdued in the 30s, and with the onset of the Great War, he enlisted, went to France, served in the Royal Field Artillery whilst on active service, was badly injured with a shattered leg. And this injury later forced him to give up a lot of sculpture, as he could not stand for very long. In 1923, Lawrence Weaver was appointed to plan and run the British exhibits to be shown at the British Empire exhibition in 1924. It was decided by the committee that 2 commemorative medals would be produced, one to be an award for exhibitors and the other to be a souvenir trinket to be sold to the public. 10 prominent designers were asked to submit designs, but Metcalfe, this slide, was impressed the advisory panel. Back one. That. Now, on this side, we've got McKennell. We're going to hear about McKennell later, I gather. McKennell was chosen for the obverse, but that's Percy's Lion of the British Empire on the exhibit. I think that's a wonderful piece of Art Deco. So he was commissioned to do 2, and then he was commissioned, yes, then with slide 4, he produced a trinket medal. And there it's in 2 different medals, and there's another Art Deco type lion, and industry and commerce in some sort of monolithic terms on the other. With Weaver's encouragement, he was soon asked to produce a symbol fitting of the modern British Empire for the Palace of Industry at Wembley. Next slide. The result was this lion, which Metcalfe modelled in his studio at Barnes, southwest London. The impecunious family was actually living in the studio with him at that time while he was doing this. These wins for the exhibition really began his rise to fame. He produced many designs for the Ashted pottery set up by Lawrence Weaver to provide employment for returned soldiers between 1923 and the 30s. Next slide. These are some of his. There's a Ginzo lion on the far side to advertise toothpaste to Johnny Walker, and the Art Deco lion of the Empire that stands about 7 inches tall is the red one. He also, next slide, produced Toby jugs of some prominent people. Lord Baldwin, PM of the UK, Lord High Chancellor, PM of the UK, Lloyd George, and over on the right, an Australian, Stanley M. Bruce, our Prime Minister, 23 to 29. He was also commissioned to sculpt 2 Art Deco styled lions that flanked the entrance to the memorial of the fallen soldier in Durban, South Africa. The lions symbolise the spirit of courage displayed by the men of Durban who fought during the First War. There it is there, and there's one of them many, many years later, still looking fairly ferocious, and Metcalfe also did the dead soldier for the cenotaph. The Ashted pottery reproduced large and small versions of the lion in various glazes. There were 2 lions extensively used in the 24 exhibition. One was the crouching lion shown by Metcalfe, and the other was the standing lion done by Charles Herrick. Further medals were struck for the exhibition next. A brooding giant leaning on a hammer and sitting on an anvil representing the might of industry, struck at the British exhibition. And the next one, this is a rare slide for the Mondo Nickel Company. It's unlisted in British historical medals, undated, struck from pure nickel for the Empire exhibition 24 to 25, 45 millimetres across, and quite rare. Obverse, the helmeted warrior of Britannia, right holding a trident, below part of a globe featuring animals from many countries. Did you see a kangaroo there? That's right.
Yeah.
The British exhibition extended into 1925. Next slide. And I've seen another copy of this here in somebody's collection, showing industry. Once more, we have the McKennell on the obverse. We'll come back to that later. But his best work was characterised, as seen on the right-hand side there, by great skill in low relief modelling, and often extreme simplicity and clarity of image, with a strong Art Deco influence. And this, of course, was a break from the crowded, fussy traditions of metal design inherited from the previous century. However, Percy's better known for some other medals and coins, and I'll show some others. A notable medal, not for exhibition, was the Silver Jubilee Medal of the Mond Nickel Company. A number of medal people were asked to submit a medal for this Silver Jubilee of their nickel company, and the selection committee said that this was no good at all, this was ridiculous. However, the boss chose Percy Metcalfe's silk with showing a mischievous fire sprite, and he thought this probably signified the process of extracting nickel from its ore by the carbonyl gas process which was used at that time. I think it's a wonderful medal. Now we come to bits that we've already heard about. Although English, his designs with some modifications, and you can see a couple of the originals over on the far side, were used for both obverse and reverse of the coins of the newly formed Irish Free State in 26. With its unity of theme, it completely broke the mould. It must have looked thoroughly modern, ahead of its time. One cannot imagine it appearing or being accepted even 10 years earlier. But society had changed greatly after the horrors of the Great War. It smashed 4 empires, or to quote Churchill, there was a drizzle of empires into the ocean at that time. And of course, predictably, it was criticised by the Roman Catholic Church, who would have preferred religious designs. Now, the penny and halfpenny were the first coins ever to show animals and the now look there, go back. See, chickens with the penny and piglets with the halfpenny. The next coin to actually show, and I've gone through thousands of pages of Krauss, were in 1964 a Malawi sterling coinage showing an elephant and calf. But then later on, we heard before that there were some changes to it, but there were some euro coins presented along these lines made by the Irish Free State, a couple of 15 euro presentations with animals and their young. And in 1938, as we've heard before, there was a change in the harp on the back. It became a more rounded Irish harp, but I haven't shown that side of it. He designed the obverse of the Australian 35 florin showing George V, whereas McKennell did the obverse of the 24 exhibition. This slide, please. Personally, I think Percy's medal is better. I think it's got, somehow it's sort of more human and perhaps a little less defined. He also designed the crowned head of George V and George VI. Both of these were used on many British colonial coins. Next slide. the crowned head of George VI, and in Fiji he designed the reverse of the shilling and that lovely Art Deco turtle on the back of the sixpence. His profiles of George VI obverse and Queen Elizabeth, next slide, were used for the coronation medal. Lovely pieces, lovely busts. And these were also used, leave that slide there, on the Royal Canadian Mint to celebrate a visit to North America. Next slide, his jugate profiles of George V and Mary were used on the medal commemorating their silver jubilee of their coronation. My favourite coin, next, is the 1935 crown on this side, the rocking horse crown that we love. Bertram McKennell was put on the obverse, and I think it should have been the Percy Metcalfe one that was used on the obverse of the Waitangi crown. Waitangi crown was interesting. This was the 5th choice of remodelling done by James Berry for that reverse of the Waitangi crown, and Berry didn't like it at all, but he'd been absolutely pushed by the Minister for Finance and micromanaged to get that one there. Next slide. The British Red Cross Voluntary Medical Services Medal, showing Florence Nightingale looking to the left holding a lamp in both hands, and the reverse, the Geneva Cross with St Andrew's Cross superimposed, and the words long, efficient service. It was awarded, the medal was awarded for 15 years of service, and for each 5 years you got a bar, and the one we have on display up there has 3 bars. So that's 30 years of service. And the awardee's name is written, as you can see on the edge. This one was awarded to Alice Mitchell. The medal was designed in 1932. Next slide. He also designed the Great Seal of the Realm with Elizabeth on it, the George Cross, and the 3945 War Medal. He designed both sides of the War Medal. The George Cross, made of silver by the Royal Mint, the colour of the ribbons officially described as garter blue. The inscription on the obverse is for gallantry, and to quote George VI, "In order that they should be worthily and promptly recognised, I have decided to create at once a new mark of honour for men and women in all walks of civilian life. I propose to give my name to this new distinction, which will consist of the George Cross and which will rank next to the Victoria Cross and the George Medal for wider distribution. The recipient's title, full name, rank, where appropriate, unit, are inscribed on the reverse of the cross together with the date. But the date that is written on it is the date of the award, not the date or dates of the deed. So on the George Cross, it's for when it was given to you. We'll move on. Some other medals. 1924 exhibition was 30 years from the opening of the Tower Bridge in London, so he produced that lovely, that also shows the Art Deco simplicity. The medal to commemorate the Everest flight of 1933 was produced within a fortnight of receiving the artist's models by the Royal Mint. And below that is the William Whitehead Watts Medal. Prize medal produced at the Royal Mint in 1932, awarded to its recipient. It's still awarded to the third year undergraduate Imperial College who comes top in either geology, mining geology, oil or oil technology. He was the Professor of Geology at Imperial College from 1906 to 30. Now, Percy designed many coins, medals and seals for the Royal Mint. He also next designed the Goldsmiths Company badge. Now, I've got a picture of it from a heraldic picture, a photograph of the badge, and a Will's cigarette card of the badge that I've managed to find somewhere. Next, King's Trophy competition, and this I think is my favourite medal. Beautiful medal. King's Trophy competition medal for the National Rifle Association, 1929. I think that archer is really something. So I'll leave that for a minute for you to look at. He also produced coins for many countries. Next. Boris III of Bulgaria. He produced that, designed and engraved that. Now, I found Boris to be a fascinating person. He joined Germany, of course, and was part of the, I'm not sure which is the Axis and which is which, because I wasn't of that generation, but he actually joined Germany, but 3 times he resisted Hitler's attempts to have the Bulgarian Jews sent to camps. He said no, he needed them. He needed them to look at after the infrastructure and had them working on roads and doing various jobs around the place, and resisted the entire time, so no Bulgarian Jews went to the death camps. And I think that really says something. Next slide. He also produced some Greek coins. They're of the classical style. Next. Kings of Iraq and Syria, Faisal I and Ghazi. He designed both of those. And the next, the Egyptian kings, Farouk and Fahd. And lastly, I've noticed something. I think he and Andor Mazaris had something in common in the way they depicted people. But because all the Brisbane people know him, well, I suppose everyone knows I'm a Mazaris fanatic. But they're similar, I suppose they're of the same era, the same Art Deco influences and that sort of thing. Next. Just for a brief rundown. Next. And last. Thank you.
Points, questions and discussion. Phil, how would defining Art Deco, it's geometric, heavy emphasis on geometric lines, triangles and geometric structure, and
bright colours.
Bright colours and elemental colours?
Yeah, I think so, yes. But what followed it was Art Nouveau, and that became a little bit, I'm not sure. Yes. Perhaps you can tell me, Nouveau before or after?
Before the Second World War.
It was before First World War, wasn't it? Nouveau, and it became then very much simplified into the Art Deco style. I'm a simple person, simple country surgeon, and I like such a cruise. Except for my wife, she's good.
The Art Deco, where Phil was saying simplified, I think that what he's pointing at also is a sort of a purification, because what I suspect that Phil likes about the Metcalfe design and work is this essentialising and purification of the image and the
There's
work.
nothing you don't need.
Hey?
Nothing you don't need.
Nothing you don't need.
Yep.
That's a heretical thing to say to us medal collectors, coin collectors. We say we still need some more. Phil, it's with some delight but humility that the conference here present you with a Cook medal.
Always welcome.
Phil, I know that your reputation is that you have probably the most complete international collection of Cook numismatica. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know, but I've got all but, I think, 6 of Alan Clinman's, and then I've got another 52 non-Clinman medals, and I've got 60, I think it's 64 Cook coins, and 14 plates, two loving cups, Wedgwood and Dalton, and then a whole heap of odds and sods.
And you have an Adventure and Reliance medal, you mentioned. The second Resolution Adventure medal.
Oh yeah, I've got 5 of those, and 2. I've got the English one reproduced in New Zealand, and I have a electrotype. Somebody said they don't like electrotypes. I have an electrotype as well.
And Phil, are you?
And I've got that first one. Oh, remember we were talking before about spending more than you have? I was at a Noble's auction when a lot of Cook stuff came up, and I think it was from Chapman's collection, and I went mad. And I kept bidding and bidding and bidding and bidding. I could hear somebody saying, "Who's this? Has he got enough money for this?" And I got checked out, I gather, with, who's the fella from Claim the Coins in town, in Brisbane?
Peter Brooks?
Yeah, Peter Brooks. And with somebody else to make sure that I could actually pay the bill when it came up. No, I didn't ask you to bail me out. No.
So are you intending to write the definitive book on Cook numismatica, or from your collection?
No. But I'm also not leaving it to museums.
Mm. Yes.
I believe that those of us that want things should have them available to be got.
Well, I know that you'll add this one proudly to your
Yes.
collection, Phil. I know you'll remember this weekend with great affection, as we all do.
Yes.
Congratulations on a wonderful trip.
They got it.
They got it.
I'll put it on it later.
Well, colleagues, our anchor this afternoon is Colin Pitchfork, a personal friend, I think, to everybody in the room here. Colin has, on so many occasions, been our consultant in matters of research, but Colin has also been such a great friend, a personal friend to everybody when we visit Sydney and Colin at Nobles, where Colin has been a senior executive now and senior consultant numismatist there for more than 3 decades. Colin, of course, is a retired scientist in his own, and historian in his own right. He has 4 degrees from the 4 Sydney universities in various areas, including for science and history. Colin was the former acting head of the School of Institute of Applied Arts and Science, Technology in Sydney. In Sydney, and after that time, of course, came to the world of numismatics, where he's been and where we all know him so very well. Colin is recognised internationally, of course, as perhaps Australia's best known numismatist, and has the rare and unique for Australia gold medal of the British Numismatic Society. Colin has given many talks on many different subjects. He's a consultant in the whole area of numismatics, particularly in the ancients. And today we're going to hear about some treasures from the Pitchfork Collection. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Thank you, John, for those lovely words, the kind words. I do think this is one of the major occasions in my life to come to one of these conferences, which I do enjoy. And it's been so long since we were last here together to enjoy each other's company and to enjoy each other's talks. I count it a privilege to be here. Today I'm going to talk about Selucid coins. And the reason why I did this is because I sit on a vast collection of Selucid coins, some many hundreds, not several thousand, I think. And there was an exhibition some years ago at Macquarie University where it was featured and a book was published on the coins that I had in my collection. This is, I'll talk a bit about in a moment or two. But the coins which are actually going to show you today, which were part of that exhibition of mine, are actually on display. And I'll talk a little bit more about those as we come to them. Selucid coins is an area which is a vast area of collecting. I know several serious collectors who have spent a whole life just revolving around this area of collecting. Idiots like me that want to be involved in everything, so I finish up. Selucid is just one of those other areas. But to me, it's a very exciting area, and it covers an area of time and so forth which fits into a lot of people's understanding of history. The Seleucid Empire was a Hellenistic or ancient Greek successor to the state of Alexander the Great. And we start to see that the great empire that Alexander created, on his death, his early death in 323 BC, brought about a great breakup of the empire. And this empire was put under the management of a regent named Perdiccas in 323, and the territory was divided between Alexander's generals, who therefore became satraps of the partition at Babylon. So we have the situation where there are a number of generals that Alexander had, who each wanted their cut of the pie. And some of them, of course, got bigger cuts than others. Anyhow, leaders who thought they should have more started to get excited about it and create wars over it. So they started to fight with each other for a while, but eventually parts of the empire, soon the various parts of the empire were fighting each other. At its greatest extent, the empire covered central Anatolia, the Levant, Mesopotamia, Persia, Turkmenistan, the Palmyra Valley, for those who don't know, it's up in Afghanistan somewhere, and the Indus Valley, which is India. It was a massive empire. And as we can see, when it was at its greatest extent, the Seleucids, who got one of the generals of Alexander, got the lion's share. Ptolemy got a little bit over here in Egypt, and others got a bit up in Greece, and some further in other parts of the world. His empire extended, as you can see, in the blue area, the light blue area, which is featured here, right up into the area of the Aegean Islands, and went far over here, almost to India. It was a vast empire. Unfortunately, the area diminished as time progressed, and the Seleucid Empire gradually whittled down. At its greatest length, it was probably in 301 BC, you can see about 3.9 million kilometres in area. A vast area, I think nearly about 2/3 the size of Australia. If memory serves me correct, Australia was about 2 million square miles. But by the time we get to 100 BC, it's down to only 100,000 square kilometres. And you can see it there, the various other groups of people that were coming into the scene. Parthians, the Greco-Roman Empire, on the Bactrians coming up on the top right there where Afghanistan is, and we have other empires, the Armenians and so forth, all coming into the act and creating a force of which the Seleucids could not compete with. There's a little pictorial images of the size and the reduction. In 124 BC, we're left with this little bit here, a coastal strip here of the Mediterranean, which includes part of what is today Jordan, Israel, and a bit of Syria, and Lebanon, and a little bit of Turkey. But by the time we got to near the end, 87 BC, we're reduced to an area there, an area there, and an area here. The realm of Cleopatra Selene, which I'll tell you a bit more about in a moment or two. The area of the Philip I, and the area of Antiochus XII. It's getting near the end of the empire, which lasted, as you can see, for just over 2 centuries. A brief history of the Seleucid empire. At its height, the empire was a vast empire which required the production of massive quantities of coinage, with many allusions to the individual king's own concept of greatness. The fortunes of the dynasty fluctuated, moving into a steady decline, some of which from family members and favourites who were manipulated. Some rulers like Antiochus III, who's portrayed over here in a beautiful metallic bust that was recovered and found some years ago, reversed the downward spiral, but only for a short while. Unfortunately for him, the Roman Republic was emerging as a rising power, and this destroyed his dreams of expansion into Europe. Antiochus III had a bit of ambition. He was going to do another Alexander, but in reverse, but of course he didn't get there. Internal conflict, and this is where the problems begin, and it probably happens in any society. Branches of the family start to fight with one another, and they descended, as you can see, from two brothers that were serious. It weakened the kingdom and resulted in a loss of territory. And again, it happened later on as well. By the 1st century BC, the once mighty empire was reduced to multiple rulers clinging to the coastal areas of the great ocean city of Damascus. So you've got the picture. It's a very small empire by the time we get to the 1st century BC. Now, here's the story about a couple of pictures of interesting coins which we're going to mention in little detail and their significance. The little silver drum up the top left-hand corner I'll be talking more about because there's only 10 of those known in the world. This particular minor ruler, who was one of the kings that didn't survive very long. The one next to it is even more exciting. It's the only second known one of this ruler to exist, both in bronze. That one's not as nice as this one. And the one on the right is a unique coin with the elephant on it and everything else that relates to the same Antiochus II. So what I proposed to do is I thought, now what do I do with this? As you know, there was a major exhibition, you may not know, but a major exhibition at Macquarie University back in 2000 and 2010 and 2011. It resulted in the publication of a book, which you saw an image of it there, the standard work, and this is the hardbound version. The hardbound version is interesting for those who are interested to know. It was only 10 copies printed hardbound, and they were numbered copies. I got number 1 for obvious reasons, but we had one number 9, and I decided that would be interesting to see how the market reacts to such a book. And it was put in the American Numismatic Society Gala auction, where you have all sorts of interesting collectors there and people. And so this was one of the auction lots. I donated it to them to sell, see what happened. It sold for $1,200 American. So it's an expensive book to buy a hardbound one, because the only one's ever sold. And as a consequence, it raised a lot of interest with people. A very detailed book review was done on it. It talks a bit about me and the various articles. And what makes this book different from others is because in the forepart of it, about half the book, it talks about the coins by the leading scholars in the world who are experts in this area, who wrote about them. And I was honoured the fact that they talked about the coins and used it as the focal point for what they wanted to say in the essays that were produced in this book. So this display over here with the actual coins which are on display, I'll put them about again there tomorrow, so if you haven't had a chance to study them, you can actually handle it, put it back in the right spot. These are the actual coins we're talking about in this exhibition. Those are the ones in that scene, and you can see that these coins are all featured in this book with photographs and detailed discussion about the coins themselves. There's a couple of the Selucids, but the articles at the front, there's a series of essays there by those scholars. So the coins which I've featured here are one of about 5 or 6 sheets like that, which portray various aspects of the coins. And I've only picked the ones which are Seleucids. There's 1 or 2 there which are, or 3 or 4 spots there which are set for the accurate Bactrian coins, which are not on display. So we've got these rulers. Seleucus I, his reign dates, is illustrated there. Some are very important, as you can see. This one's unique. It's illustrated in the standard work. Now, SC stands for Seleucid coins by the leading scholar in the world at that stage, it still is Arthur Horton, as well as Oliver Hoover. They are 4-volume work on all the Selucid coins. 2 main volumes in 2 parts, is the way to describe it. And that coin, of course, is illustrated, talked about. This one here is the ones with the chariots of the elephant chariot on reverse. This is this coin I mentioned to you that was illustrated there, the unique coin there of Antiochus I, struck as co-regent and king in 294 to 275 BC. It was issued in Ecbatania, which is a fairly eastern mint in what is today probably part of Iran, and Horton had this coin, so it's illustrated a number of places, but it's the only one that's known, particularly with that elephant featuring on the reverse. Then we have a couple of coins below it, which featured 2 of the Antiochus II. Tetradrachms, one from Fakir, Ionian mint, and the other from the Bactrian mint with Diodotus I. At that stage they had parts of Bactria and they issued their own coins, although Diodotus sometimes put his name on the coins and sometimes Antiochus had his name on the coin. He was, shall we say, the senior king. And then there was a problem where there was a trouble about the succession of Seleucus the first, and Antiochus, who was murdered a little later after Antiochus here, 246 to 244. So they issued a coin like it would be a regular tetradrachm of the Selucid, but they put slaughter on it, which meant basically they're not really going to portray a name because we don't know who the real ruler is going to be, whether it's king. And so it has the name of the previous ruler was murdered, but we don't know who to put there as the new ruler. Right. From Seleucus II to Antiochus III, we have a whole batch of rulers here, and I think basically, I'm not going to go into detail about who they are, what they are. The point about all this, I suppose, is that if you follow the chart over here, you find that the linear descent of each ruler fits into a line which is like an ordinary family tree. And you see there are breaks, they go off in this direction, they go off that direction. And then one collapses and another break here occurs. So it happens like it went through the whole period like this, and this of course effectively weakened the empire. The coins carry mostly the portrait of the ruling monarch, although this one carries obviously a portrait of Alexander the Great, which they wanted to sort of bring back to the concept of people who saw the coin would say, it's linked to Alexander the Great, because it has a portrait of Heracles on the obverse, which was used on Alexander the Great's coins. So they made the link. It's linked to Alexander the Great. The ruler is an important descendant of Alexander the Great. But others decided to put their own portrait on the coins. Some of them had interesting features like this one of Antiochus Hierarch. He's got a reindeer head, but it's also got a hand on it, which is indicating a special significance that he was given as a ruler. The myths spread, as you see, from all over the place. You might wonder where Alexandria Troas or Agai Aeolus is. It's right in eastern Turkey. So it's right up there near Gallipoli. In fact, it's just across the bay from Gallipoli. So we have coins being issued there. We had coins coming from Susa, which is way over where eastern part of Iran, and we have some Antioch, which becomes in fact the main mint. Seleucus III struck at Antioch, and there's a nice example of his work. You see how the portraitures reveal the different aspects, if you like, of each of the rulers. Some were young. Antiochus III there in his early stage, an early issue, he ruled from 222 to 187. We spoke about him a few minutes ago as being one of the great rulers, hence he's called the Great. But he issued these early coins with a youthful portrait. By the time he got to the end of his reign, it shows him as an older man. Then we carry on with the following rulers as well. Seleucus IV, Ptolemaeus is a very important mint in the southern part of what is today, well, virtually the Gaza area is, and it's part of Israel today. It's a Phoenician mint. That's a very nice example of that work. Then we have the son of Seleucus IV, who unfortunately was quickly murdered by the successor of Antiochus III. He became Antiochus IV. He didn't like any competition, so he murdered him. These coins are very, very rare. As I said, there are only 10 known of this ruler, And they were all discovered mostly in 1980. There's a drama over there, a very fine one. That actually came from a very famous collection. It was known as the collection that was formed by the Silver Kings of America at the time.
Bunker Hunts.
Bunker Hunt, that's right, from the Bunker Hunt collection, although I didn't state it there. But he formed a great collection of Greek coins and other actually Byzantine coins. But this was one of his, and he managed to, through NFA, managed to get hold of one of these coins. That was his. The next ruler, Antiochus IV, was a rather a terrible man in some respects, because he was persecuting people, and he captured what is today what was Israel, Jerusalem, and so forth, enslaved the people that tried to. He was a problem. We have a picture of him here in the coin from Antioch Mint, but he also tried to put out these commemoratives, which is very, very rare, where we have a portrait of Zeus or Poseidon, Zeus on this particular one, but there are other examples known, which there's probably about 4 or 5 of those known, possibly for a religious festival in Daphne in 166, or maybe it was struck in Egypt in 168 on his return from Egypt. Very rare, very important, comes from the Horton collection, and so it goes on. This first one here, Selucid piece here, is actually illustrated. This is the coin that they're using as their main illustration in that book. The next coin is of Antiochus V. Each of these rulers had other names. Sometimes they're appended to them, like Euphor, Paco, Euphenes, and Philopater, and so it goes on. That separates them in a way of which particular one you're talking about when you're looking at the name Antiochus or Seleucus. Demetrius the first had 2 reigns. He came in the first time around, 162 to 150, and he came back later on when it was 15 years later, thereabouts. There's an example from his first reign. This is the Horton coin from his own book called CSE, the Seleucid Empire, Coins of the Seleucid Empire, produced by the American Numismatic Society. So a lot of these coins, you can see it, if you look at them over there, you'll see them, and you can look and feel it, if you like, are coming from famous collections. The next one down is Alexander Balas. A little different in portraiture. These are all fairly nice examples of what I have. Demetrius II is the first reign of his tetrarch. He had a couple of goes in it as well. And then, of course, we have last down here, Antiochus VI, which has an interesting feature, because if you look carefully at this coin, he has a radiant crown. Now, Laurie Sherman, whom we mentioned earlier today when we're looking forward to having a memorial thought of him for a minute or 2 there this morning, Laurie Sherman has a superb one of those coming up for auction, which I've catalogued. It's an absolute gem. I thought, I don't know whether I can afford it or not. It might go for a record price. So that's the Antiochus VI with the radiant crown, and he's a little bit different. He doesn't have either Apollo or Zeus sitting in the reverse. He has this sort of reverse which portrays a Dioscuri. He was only a boy of 6. He didn't rule for very long. You can see for 2 years, and someone else decided that he's no good, get him out of the way, and he was supported by Diodotus Typhon. Even though he was like his godfather, if you like, Typhus was older, he was general, and he puts his initials on the coin, TPY. So he was making sure that everyone understood, I'm the power behind the throne. Of course, it didn't last for too long, but he got rid of it anyhow. Well, I think he had a hand in it. He died an unusual early death. Antiochus VII and Cleopatra Thea. Lucas, this thing. Antiochus, sort of jumping. How do I go back?
Just roll the centre.
Go back one more. Right.
No, we did that one. That's on you're up to. I was thinking about the news.
Right, okay. Antiochus VII to Cleopatra the Thea. Some of the women start to portray themselves on the coins, and
Be careful about the house.
sorry, you want to take that? Oh, I tried to be clever. Do it myself. It's not the end yet. That looks fine, just stay there.
That's the one?
That's it. Antiochus VII, now go on further forward. Now, we just finished with the Antiochus VI, and so we move into the next slide, which is Antiochus VIII.
Is that one?
We've jumped one, I think.
Jump one.
We've jumped one. Antiochus, there we are. Okay, so Antiochus VII is there. There's a group of rulers that come along. You can sort of say that Antiochus were one group, the Seleucids and the Alexanders were another group. So there was this inter-rivalry. So each took over part of the territory, lost it, and the next group came along and had his next kingship coming through now. So we have the Cappadocian royal mint. Now there's an interesting one. The coins were so popular throughout the Greek world of Seleucus that even on the fringe of the empire, the Cappadocian kings started to copy the coins. And the top one there, even though it's Antiochus VII, it's from the Cappadocian royal mint as a posthumous issue. So it came out something like 40 years or 50 years later. Even though I have the originals of these too, but that's the copy. Down the next one is Demetrius II again, second time around. This time he's growing a beard. And you can see a very nice example of his work there. And then there's a little drab of his, which is a small one. They're quite rare. Following that, we have Alexander II, Sabinus. Mary Lamon, who's a big collector, was a big collector of these, and she sold the collection for some. I just collected Selucid, and she sold his collection for several $1 million in America. And she's always asking me when she's serving every year, show me images of your Alexander II Sabinus. I want to know everyone that exists. If you're doing a paper, I think she got me through. Following up, we have Cleopatra Thea and Antiochus VIII Eurypylus from Damascus. Now, Cleopatra seized power and she took her son as a joint ruler. So it was very interesting because here she features herself as a prominent person on the first one. When you look at the portraits here, you've got the overlay of the two portraits as a not jugate, but overlaying each other. The woman is facing is the first one you see. She's the one in power. Her son, who she took on, Antiochus VIII, he survived for a few years, 4 years, and then he moved on. Can we just go to the next one now? He carried on, as you can see, till 97 BC, and he matured as an adult. But the empire was diminishing. So I showed you at 100 BC, it was reduced to only a couple of 100,000 square miles, kilometres an area. But then a whole series of short-term rulers came into play. Each was competing for their territory. Antiochus IX was one of them, quite different portrait again. This time he has a reverse there with Apollo, Tyche on the reverse. Then Demetrius III got into the act again, and he wanted to be in power, and so he came along in 97 and survived for 10 years. And we have this one, is interested in Damascus, which has this very different sort of featured reverse. And then you come to the last of this particular group of Seleucus VI, 96 to 94 BC. Now these coins are theoretically being issued in abundance because they need to keep their armies intact because they were sorting things out with each other. But the reality was that the territory was getting smaller and smaller. Next slide. Then we have another Antiochus comes into play, Antiochus X, another rival who's reigning at the same time in another part of the territory. He issued an Antioch mint. Under him was, where he's portrayed there, is Philip I, who is actually issuing coins in Cilicia, probably at Tarsus, and he's reigning at contemporary, if you like, at the same time as the Antiochus X. Then there's the last discovery coin, the issue of Cleopatra Selene and Antiochus XIII. As I said, the last ruler, Cleopatra Selene, was the last ruler, and she was removed from the scene in 69 BC. That ended the Seleucid Empire. But what makes this coin very interesting, some years ago, 30 years ago, I bought a big hoard from Chris Martin in London. And Chris Martin had this big, horrible, messy, clunky hoard, all very greasy touching. And he said, you can have it for a reasonable sum of money, £100, £200, something like that. Unsorted. I'm not sure. So I bought them back, and Ron Bolden, who used to be a member, and probably still is, I think, a member of society, who doesn't come to meetings anymore.
Ron is still a member.
Still a member. He lives in the Blue Mountains. And, he got so excited about these. He said, I'll clean them, because that's what he does, a bit of cleaning. So he restored them, if you like. We brought them back. And he gave them back to me. Nicholas Wright wanted to study them carefully. And he did a very 30-page article which appeared in Coin Hoards 9 or 10. If you know what Coin Hoards is, it's a big, thick publication that comes out every decade or so these days. And lists all the great hoards that have been found and published. And this one describes the whole of this hoard in detail. And this was the discovery coin. So this is a fantastic discovery. We thought it might have been the only one in existence at that time. Then we found that Arthur Horton had acquired one which is sold, but it was a pretty rough one. So it becomes the last coin of the Seleucids that were issued. And they were right near the end. But the hoard was buried about 69, 70 BC, so we know it was the last issue that she came up with. And she again is featured in the forefront. Her son, Antiochus XIII, we've gone through this, the others that came into the line, but there were 13 overall, and that was the end of the dynasty, if you like, of the Seleucid Empire. I do say that's a very brief overview. I mean, the amount of literature on this is vast, and it's extensive, and you can spend your life researching. Scholars have. It occupies one of the 12 volumes, or 13 probably when they finish it, of the, what's it called, Ancient Greek Coins catalogue by C&G, these volumes, each one of them is thick. The Seleucid Empire is one. It's just a sort of seer reference. It's a bit like the reference you have for coins, the old seer references. Well, these are the new ones that have been coming out. No prices, just have this particular writing, and it refers to Seleucid coins by Arthur Horton, and which ones are numbered. So you can refer back to this. The numbers are Seleucid coin books. So what I've done is bought a selection of these coins, put them out on display. I'll put them out again tomorrow. You can have a look at them. If you want to look at them now, you know a bit about what we're talking about. There's a 4-page book review on this particular publication. It's interesting to read. It's a very positive book review. And I suppose the only other say is this comment here. It starts off by saying Nicholas Wright was the author of the publication. He's a doctor, he's a lecturer now in Ireland, I believe. He said Nicholas Wright's present work is the second volume in the Australian Centre of Australian Numismatic Studies of Ancient Coins in Australian Collection Series, following closely on the heels of his predecessors, Callisthenes, Alexander and the Hellenistic Kingdom, the Westmoreland collection. Like the first volume, Coins from Ancient Asia Minor and the East begins with a group of short thematic essays by different scholars before plunging into the catalogue. It should be pointed out that due to the vastness of Colin Pitchfork's collection, the catalogue represents a selection of the coins that were exhibited at the Metcalfe University Museum from November 25, 2011 to November 25, 2012. So that's what I've done. I brought the collection along to show you. Have a look at the book. There's another copy of the book there which I apparently had endorsed it. There are no copies available as far as I'm aware now. I'm getting these. I've got one brand new one and I didn't bring it. It's meant to be going there. But the one I bought in there was meant for Dr. Bruce Short. And I meant to give it to him back 10 years ago and send it endorsed to him, but I never caught up with him. So here's the book I wanted to give you. I've seen it, but I haven't done the book with him. Anyhow, that's the state of the nation at the moment. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Colin, tetradrams, I know you're the great authority on Greek tetradrams, but you've shown us all the tetradrams. Did they pass up and down the line of the great empire, irrespective of the
They moved
individual
around.
kingdoms?
It was like they were the bullion currencies of the time, and hoards have been found all over the Greek world with some of these coins. Admittedly, as you move into the period of the Roman times, it becomes less definitive. But the famous Asiat hoard, which was buried around about 470 BC, was a remarkable hoard of nearly 900 coins that come from all over Sicily, South Italy, right across the Greek world and into Turkey. But where were the coins found? In Asia. Most people probably don't know where that is. They're about 800 or 1,000 kilometres down the Nile in Egypt. So the movement of coins takes place all around the Greek world. It's a bit like the American dollar, I suppose, moves around and people can use it in any country you go to, they'll accept it. But as time progressed, various countries developed their own control, if you like, of the coinage. And I feel that the coins of the Selucid became much more a local coinage, even though they are found in hoards. But the hoards are always in the area, not outside the area. And it becomes even more so in the case of the Christophoric coinage, which was a later coinage. I've got a special book which I'll show you tomorrow, which is quite a remarkable book on the Christophoric coinage, where it was already, Christophoric coinage come from about a dozen cities, mostly from 3 or 4 main cities, but there's a few smaller ones, up in the eastern part, the western part of Turkey, in the central and western part of Turkey. And all the hoards of Christophoric coins that have ever been found have been found in that area. Yet they are like they're good silver. So the nature of economies of different countries and states became more self-reliant on their own coinage. But we still find that mixes. The Roman coins, of course, hoards that have been found have had a continuum of coinage. As you may or may not know, but they have found coins of the Republic in hoard mixed with Septimius Severus in England, for example, which is 200 years after the Republic. So they continued to circulate. And I will remember it happened in later times too, the famous Attenborough hoard, which is an English hoard that was buried in 1420. I finished up owning at one time about 200 or 300 pieces from that hoard. And I was interested in them because as the weight of the penny dropped in weight from about 1.3 grams or 2 grams down to less than a gram by the time of Henry V, that drop in weight was reflected by the wear on the coin. So they still have the same amount of silver in them, so they still continue to circulate even though they're pretty worn. So you find that if it's good silver, its value, it'll continue to circulate. But in the Greek world, it didn't do as much that later period.
Colin, an encyclopedic delivery. We know you'll treasure this as a memento of a wonderful day here from us all, Colin, with our esteem and best wishes.